Well, welcome to all y'all in the audience this morning. Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Issue or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, begin by stating their name, limit remarks to less than 5 minutes, and then the council members can request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. Is there any public comment? Is there any public?
Yeah, is there anybody that qualifies?
Okay, we'll move forward. First item on the regular agenda is the minutes dated Wednesday, June the 3rd. Those have been emailed out, and I reviewed them last night. If there's any corrections or additions from anyone, if not, I'd accept a motion to approve.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Ben?
I'll second.
Jonathan? Discussion. Discussions on the minutes dated June the 3rd. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Update on water supply status, gauging stations, and the reuse project. Bill, you got a lot to go over.
Morning.
Morning.
I just want to take a quick minute here before we get into the rate discussion, just to kind of talk about where things are as far as water supply. We've had some great rain, but as you know, we haven't caught near as much of it as we would like to have. So from a water supply standpoint in the reservoirs, we're not a lot different than we were going into this year. So while the rain's good, certainly helps with water demand and irrigation, but we're still in a drought. And so we're still looking at how we respond to that. So we'll continue in that mode. I wanted to just give you an update. You had made a recommendation to the council on 2 items. One was to install a gauging station in the Red Arroyo so we could see what the flows are in making it down to around the Chadbourne area. So that's where the gauging station is going to be. And then also to proceed with a pilot study for the reuse project. The council agreed unanimously to proceed with the pilot study, and the Development Corporation agreed to fund both of those, and the council, of course, ratified that decision. So both of those are in the works. We met with the USGS folks yesterday to look at clearing the area for the gauging station, so that'll be installed soon, and then we are moving forward with getting everything in place for beginning the pilot study.
Good. Gauging system in place by when are they thinking? Do you know?
You have a feel for that, Chuck?
I talked to Kerry Carmen, USGS, yesterday. He called, and he said they were shooting for the week of July 27th. So pretty
Wow.
quick.
Okay. Super.
And then I guess the other gauge right behind it is what he told me.
All right.
Okay. Good news.
Good.
Questions, anybody, on the study or the gauging system? I appreciate the council's support. Appreciate the work we've done. I think we're moving forward, at least get some determination, so excited.
Chairman, I got one question for Bill. Bill, how, as far as the groundwater study, how far along? Have they punched the piezometer holes yet?
They have, and for any specific detail, Rick, you want to provide? Ricky's been working with HDR on that project. So.
They have put in all the piezometers out in the location, and they are already doing some monitoring, so it's coming along. It'll be a while before we get any reports back. They have noticed just some real early stuff, a saturated gravel layer, they call it, so that's where we're at.
Would it be possible for us to get the lithology of those piezometer holes from the engineers?
I'm sure we can. I'll get it for you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, please, move forward.
Okay. That's all I have on that, Mr. Boyd.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Presentation. Y'all ready? Rick?
Okay. As we've discussed previously, the City Council engaged the firm of Tellus Financial Consultants to perform a cost, service, and rate design study. We've been working on that with them for some time, and what we wanted to do today was bring you some of the preliminary results of that. What I would like to get from you out of this is some recommendations or your thoughts on moving forward. We will make some recommendations at the end of the study, and based on what the cost of service, the rate structure, different rates depending on moving forward with projects. And so what we need to do here, I think, today is just kind of agree that this is where we're at and continue moving in that direction. Or if you have some different thoughts or ideas on what you think we need to do, then we need to hear those so we can make those adjustments accordingly. With me today is Rick Giardina and Rocky Crayley with Tellus Financial Consultants. I've asked Rick to give a little bit more in-depth introduction of them so you understand who they are and their background. Tellus Financial Consultants is one of the largest financial rate consulting firms in the country. Had the opportunity of knowing of them for some time. They do excellent work and work with municipalities all over the country and a lot here in Texas. Rick is probably one of the leading rate experts in the country, so we're very fortunate to have him and Rocky on this team and looking at our rate issues and helping us develop a strategy for moving forward. So with that, let's let them come up. This isn't a short presentation. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so appreciate your patience in that.
If I can ask everybody if you'll move your phones away from the mics, that noise that you're hearing, that's the interference from the phones.
Bill, thank you for that introduction. Good morning. My name is Rick Giardina, and I'm an Executive Vice President with Tellus Financial Consultants. As Bill indicated, we are one of the largest financial consulting firms in the country, specializing in exactly this kind of work. We are based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Rocky's in our Austin office, and I'm up out of Denver. I've been doing this for over 37 years. Having started my career with the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. Since then, I've worked for some of the largest and some of the smallest utilities in the country. Our work here in Texas has ranged from the city of Austin, Houston, Dallas, El Paso, and a number of other smaller water districts and communities throughout Texas. So we bring a broad range of experience specific to Texas and the situation here. For example, this drought you've been going through and the challenges that places upon utilities, to communities across the country. Again, some of the largest from New York City, where I've worked, to the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the largest wholesale provider in the country. We think that experience is useful. The solutions that we've developed in those communities aren't going to fit here. The challenge is to tailor what we've learned in other communities to the situation here in San Angelo. And so throughout the presentation, you'll be hearing bits and pieces of that. And as Bill indicated, our goal today is to get feedback from you, almost a straw man poll of your thoughts based on what we talk about today. And heavy emphasis on what we talk about, because you don't want to hear from Rick and Rocky for the next 2 hours. We'd like this to be an exchange. And please don't hesitate to interrupt, ask a question at any point in time. So my colleague and I, Rocky Crayley, will be tag teaming this presentation. We'll change seats at various times, but we will be chiming in on one another's presentation. So why don't we get started? And our agenda for today, we want to give you a little bit of background information on this study, what it is we are doing and what it is we are not doing. We want to talk about some of the specific challenges facing the water utility and the water reclamation utility here in San Angelo. And you've been briefed on maybe the most significant of those having to do with long-term supply, but we'll talk more about that. And we're going to focus an awful lot on the financial plan. What does that look like today? What will it look like over the next 5 years as we go forward? What could it look like? Different scenarios. And then rate structure. Rate structure is effectively how we generate our money, who we get that money from to maintain the utility. And then we'll summarize at the end. This slide illustrates what we call the typical utility practice, the essence of the rate study. And communities don't do a rate study every year. The American Water Works Association, the AWWA, recommends these kinds of studies be undertaken in a formal, comprehensive manner about every 5 to 7 years. And that can vary depending on the utility circumstance. But in those years between a major rate study, cost will increase. That's the nature of the utility business. It's a very capital-intensive business. Costs typically do not decline. And we're always in the mode of identifying and assessing and replacing aging infrastructure. That results in what we call user charge increases. The rates that we charge for service, the monthly fixed charge and the volume rate based on your metered water consumption. And the different components of the rate structure, these change over time. Between these major rate studies, many communities just apply across-the-board increases. Whatever the rates and fixed charges are, let's increase them 2%, 5% this year. Others might focus on one of those components. Well, let's just increase the fixed charge. If we need 2% overall, let's increase that by 5% to get our overall increase. And so, in these years between major rate studies, and you'll hear more about this through the presentation, things can get out of alignment. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And out of alignment means you might have one customer class paying more or less than they should. You might be generating more revenue through the volume rate versus the fixed rate, or the fixed charge. And so we're going to talk specifically about those things. And so on the right-hand side, we then have the formal rate study that's done every 5 to 7 years. And this asks and answers 3 important questions. The first being, how much revenue do we need? We have our budget, we have our O&M, our capital cost, we have other financial metrics that are important that we achieve in, for example, making us an attractive credit as we go out and want to raise capital. So how much do we need? Do we need $10 million? Do we need $11 million each year? That gives us that aggregate value or number. The next question is, who should be paying? And this goes back to the cost of service. The cost to serve a single-family residential customer is different than the cost to serve a large industry or an irrigation, landscape-only customer. The demands they place on the system, when they place those demands on the system, the facilities that we have to invest in and size are all determined by these different demands. So that second question really gets into who should be paying. We know we need to generate $10 million, but how much of that do we need to get from each of the respective customer classes or groups of customers that we serve? The third question is, how should those customers pay? If we had $100 that we need to generate each year to maintain our utility, and we had 100 customers, every one of those customers could pay $1. And that would be great. We know how much money we're getting every year. It's a fixed charge of $1 per year, and everyone pays that. But then if you're using more water than I am, why should we be paying the same amount? So the rate structure helps us determine that relationship between the fixed charge and the volume rate. It helps us reflect rates that recover the indicated class cost of service, the results of that second step of who should be paying. And so we're going to go into a lot more detail on all 3 of these questions as we move forward. The objective of this study, if I were to cook it down from all of the words on this slide, is really to develop that financial plan for the water utility, for the water reclamation utility, as if they were standalone entities. go through a cost of service process to determine the customers and how much each class should pay, and then the specific rates. So it's, again, the how much, the who should pay, and how they should pay. That's really the essence of this study. Okay? And at the end, it's to leave the city with a tool, a model that the city can use on a going forward basis to, at a minimum, work within the annual budget process to develop that financial plan and annually answer that question of how much money we should be generating. And it's not necessary, as I said earlier, to do a detailed cost of service study each and every year. Every 5 to 7 years makes a whole lot of sense. Maybe for some utilities it's more frequent depending on how things are changing. But that's the essence of this project. And so as we move forward today, we're going to be sharing with you different options for each of those three questions. How much money we should be generating, who should pay, and how they should pay. But let me sort of share with you our initial thoughts or recommendations. So as we get into these, you'll already know the leaning that we have with regard to these alternatives. So with regard to the financial plan, how much money we should generate, one alternative is that we do nothing. We just stand pat, and Rocky's going to share those results with you and whether or not that's even viable. But we're recommending a scenario that we're referring to as a moving forward scenario, where you don't stand pat and you make needed investments in infrastructure and issue debt in part to pay for that infrastructure, and as such have to increase the amount of revenue that's necessary from the water utility and the water reclamation utility. So this is what we're calling a moving forward alternative, and that's our initial recommendation. With regard to who should pay and how they should pay, we are recommending that you move and realign or get into alignment cost of service, and to do that over essentially a 3-year transition period. You didn't get into this position of being out of alignment overnight, so we don't think you ought to try to correct it overnight. And then with regard to the rate structure, exactly how you charge your customers, we're going to be making a number of recommendations that, in the simplest of terms, simplify the rate structure. There's a lot of different rates, different usage thresholds that you have, and we think there's an opportunity here to simplify that for your customers. And that's the primary focus. There's also another benefit internal in terms of the complications and the complexities of the rate structure that your staff has to deal with on a daily basis. So those are essentially our three recommendations. You'll hear a lot more about that as we move forward. In terms of what challenges the utility is facing going forward, starting on the left, financial sufficiency, again, that first question, our annual revenue requirements. Revenue requirements, that's a term we use in the industry that defines how much money we need to cover our cost. We have O&M cost, we have capital cost, we have debt service payments, those kinds of things. So that defines how much we need in the way of annual revenue requirements to be financially sufficient. Financial sustainability then layers on top of that things like debt service coverage. And that's a financial measure that lending agencies and the bond market looks at. It's really a measure of our ability to repay our debt. Another target is what we refer to as working capital or cash on hand. And from our own personal budgets, this is really no different. How much money do we need on a walking around basis to pay our bills? Customers use water, we bill them, we eventually get paid by them, but we've got that period of time in between where we need to have enough cash to pay our bills. So we have those two primary measures. More now from a technical or a service level point of view is the question of water supply and ensuring that we can meet the demands of this community on a going forward basis. I think it's probably safe to say that we have some deficiencies today, and San Angelo is not alone, that have been exposed by the drought that we've been in. And so we're now looking at what are the answers to that? How can we move forward and have a more robust water portfolio? And we'll talk more about that, and Bill has been talking to you about the solutions there for some time. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we're a very capital-intensive business on both the water side and the water reclamation side. That's not going to change. The industry as a whole has huge challenges in this regard. And so we need to start stepping up, if you will, and looking at our reinvestment rate. As this infrastructure ages, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be replaced. That doesn't increase our capacity. It just allows us to maintain service levels, and in some cases probably enhance service levels as we deal with deferred infrastructure needs. So those are really the challenges and the drivers of a study like this. Backing up to financial sufficiency and financial sustainability, you see here just one example of the challenge that the industry faces, that San Angelo has faced in terms of being able to project the amount of revenue we're going to generate each year, and the challenge that presents particularly under drought circumstances, when for years, if not decades, we've been asking our customers to conserve water. They've listened to us. Remember everything I said a moment ago about we're a capital-intensive business? That means we have very, very high fixed costs. In the short run, customers use less water. Our costs don't change. And in simple terms, what does that mean? We have to raise rates. So this just illustrates, looking back a few years, what we estimated as our water sales revenue in the green bar, and what actually happened, the blue bar. And in the last couple of years, this has significantly been influenced by the drought. And because of drought situations and the stages of the drought that we've been in, we've asked our customers to use even less water. And the only cost savings we see when they use less water is a decrease in chemical cost and power cost. Those are really the only two variable costs. If consumption goes down 10%, we don't lay off 10% of our labor force, or we don't tell the banks and the bond markets we're going to pay only 90% of the debt service payment that we owe you. Okay, so that's a significant issue. And I could have produced a graph like this for almost any community in the West, the Southwest, that has been through a drought. And even going back to the Southeast and the Carolinas and the drought that they've experienced, and in the Atlanta area. This is just sort of the nature of our business. It goes back to what I said earlier. We could charge every one of our customers $1 and have a fixed charge, and then we wouldn't worry about this. Regardless of their use, we would generate enough money. That is great for financial sufficiency, but doesn't do very much for an objective of conservation. Because if I conserve, then I wouldn't see a decrease in my bill. So why should I conserve? If I'm paying $1, I'm going to use as much water as I want. I'm just paying $1. And so we've got to try to balance these goals. And when we get to rate structure, we'll have a little more discussion about balancing these kinds of objectives. So I just wanted to share that one example of one of the challenges that the utility has on a going forward basis. One of the things that we do as a firm every other year, and working with the American Water Works Association, is we produce an annual survey. And I've got a copy of it here, and we've left a copy with Bill. This is an annual survey of utilities across the country. It looks at rates. It looks at other metrics for their operations. And so we've pulled some of the information from here for what we call here our National Group C, which is comparable in size to San Angelo. And I want to talk about a couple of things here. First, this is for the water utility. And looking at this National Group C, you can see going across operating costs per account, per capita, and on the far right-hand side per MGD. Below that, we then compare the city of San Angelo. And you can see for operating cost, you compare generally in terms of on a per account and per capita basis, you compare fairly well to the other communities. It's difficult in any survey to draw hard and fast conclusions, but a couple of thoughts here, and if you move to the far right-hand side, you'll see that your operating cost at $1.66 is almost 4 times the operating cost of Group C. Do not conclude that's because of inefficiencies in the system. In this calculation, we have dollars as our numerator, gallons, millions of gallons sold as our denominator. You're in a drought. You're not selling many gallons. Your denominator is depressed, and that's driven the unit cost up. That's why we look at all 3 metrics, and you can see you compare favorably on the other 2 metrics. But because of the unique situation you're in today, I would call this $1.66 an anomaly. Okay? Below that, we looked at the capital side on the water utility. And here, the takeaway for me in terms of average annual capital spending per account or per capita is that you're spending substantially less than the industry. You're reinvesting less. And this goes to one of my earlier points about the challenges. One of the 4 or 5 challenges is getting to a proper level of reinvestment. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at in the financial plan alternatives that we share with you. Reinvesting in infrastructure in general, and specifically, as Bill has been talking to you, reinvesting in water supply. And that's going to be a big driver in everything that we talk about. We did a similar comparison on the water reclamation side. And your operating costs across the board come in lower, and water reclamation is a little bit different in that our denominator that I talked about, the number of gallons we sell, and water reclamation, that's not very variable because of the way we bill our customers. And it's typically representative, the way we bill our customers, of their indoor water use. And so in a drought, our indoor water use doesn't change much. So we don't see that kind of variability that we see on the water side. But looking on the lower part of this slide and at the capital, again, I think it's the same kind of comments or the same types of comments. Our investment rate in our system is lagging behind what we see for comparable sized utilities. And so again, that's something we're going to be talking about, the reinvestment rate in the system. Okay. We then looked at this same document and the monthly bill for water and wastewater. And you can see the values here. The distances between these graphs may give a false impression when you're talking about, on the water side, Group C utilities roughly in the $24 range, compared to your current water bill about $30. Part of this is, in fact, we're in a drought, we use less water, we have to still recover our costs, so that bill might be forced up a little bit higher. But these differences are not that significant. When you combine the 2 bills, and the city's at about $50 per month, water and wastewater, compared to the industry that's at about at $52 when you look at water reclamation and water combined. So again, I wouldn't conclude that you're far afield from the industry. And part of it has to do with how costs get assigned to your water utility and your water reclamation utility. That's why right now I made mention of the total, where the city bill is at $50 and for the industry we're at about $52 on a combined basis for a typical customer using almost 4,000 gallons per month. Let me come back to this issue of revenue stability and another illustration of this fixed cost dilemma that we have. And what we're showing here in the orange bar is a representation of the fixed costs for each of the 2 utilities. And they represent about, in this illustration, about 80+% of the cost are fixed. And what we don't have in the fixed cost is the transfer from the utilities to the general fund. So that would drive that up even more. But what we're comparing that cost to is the blue graph which is the amount of revenue we generate in a fixed fashion. And so on the water side, that number is about 40% compared to fixed costs of over 80%. It may seem like a very significant gap, but actually San Angelo is probably a little bit ahead of the industry in having water fixed revenue at that level. A client I've been working with recently, Denver Water. Denver Water generates 7% fixed revenue. Yeah, exactly my reaction, Mr. Boyd. But yet they're a AAA rated entity. But it does present particular problems for them. So you can still be highly rated, have low revenue generation. The City of Austin, we completed the study for them a few years back, taking their amount of fixed revenue from about, I think we were about 12% up to almost 20%. So the industry is headed that way. I said San Angelo is probably already ahead of the game a little bit. On wastewater, what we're seeing here, I would echo that. You're still ahead of the game. Wastewater we tend to see in the 40, 50, 60% range because of high fixed charges, because of a lack of variability in the revenue stream. Customers tend to, based on how we bill them, the indoor use doesn't change much, so we get about it's a predictable revenue source. So neither of these are cause for alarm. It's just important to look at and see where we are. Now, at this point, what I'd like to do is ask Rocky to come up and walk us through the financial plan assumptions, the key drivers of the assumptions, the key drivers of the plan, the underlying assumptions of the plan, and then share with you some of the results. And it's hard for me to be quiet, so I'll probably sit over there and chime in on occasion. And then I'm going to come back and talk about some of the rate scenarios that we have for you. Any question? Yes?
Going back to page 4, the water metrics compared to the industry, we're that 4X over the national average. Would that be that number, $1.66 on operating cost? The comparison was just by size of city or by size of department, number of meters, I suspect, or something like that. Would that number be more in line? I'm guessing had we segregated out kind of geography as well. In other words, similar climatic situations, water sourcing situations to what we find ourselves in. Is that a safe assumption?
I believe that's exactly on point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that where you're going to go? I mean, I'm more interested in West Texas. I mean,
Yeah.
Abilene, Midland, Odessa. I mean, we work on that together. So I know we look at national numbers, but at some point I want to get it down to media covers a very large area, a couple hundred square miles. We need to be able that we're comparable to all of our neighbors. I think that's a lot better sell to San Angelo and the county. I mean, we're not only looking at San Angelo, I want to make sure we look at the entire Tom Green County.
Yeah.
So we get there.
It would not this morning.
I understand.
But down the road, when we ultimately get to honing in on a financial plan and rates, the intent is to share some of that information with
Good.
you. Yes, with you and council. Yes.
And I guess another question on that revenue stability, you mentioned that we're kind of ahead of the curve in that 30+% revenue generation in fixed fashion, you said. Is that pose any risk given that is that all local, or are we're being ahead, does that leave less room for us to maneuver and fixing and righting some of the issues that you're going to be pointing out? I may be jumping ahead here, but
I would not view it as a limiting factor.
Okay.
Now, limiting in the sense, yes, that we're already at 40% as shown here. One of the considerations in taking it even higher is the impact that a high fixed rate has on low volume water users. Mm-hmm. And I choose my words carefully. I said low volume water users. I did not say low income water users. Because low income water users can be low volume and can be high volume. But if you think about the proportion of my bill that I would pay in a fixed charge and the impact that that has on me before I even use a gallon of water. So the higher the fixed rate, it can have that impact on low volume customers. And we just need to be sensitive to that. But we're trying to balance a myriad of objectives here.
Mr. Guardiani, I think it's also important to know that, and you probably are aware of this, but I think it's important for the board and for me just to kind of mention to the board, the low volume usage is really because of our makeup, the mix of the customer classes. So we don't have a lot of commercial or industrial, and that's evidenced by the ad valorem taxes. The majority of the tax burden is on the residential. If we had more commercial, more industrial, more heavy users that increase the volume of consumption, then that would be much more positive for our revenue stability.
It could be. In general, I would agree with your statement. There are certainly commercial and industrial water users whose demand can be variable. But in general, I would agree, Mr. Pena, with your statement. Yes. Okay.
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah. That's a great point, and that's a huge challenge facing San Angelo is we have this much water, and in a drought, it ain't enough. Or in a drought, it now goes to this much water.
I guess my point is, again, the majority of our customer class is residential, in my opinion.
Yes,
if you have a medical office building like Shannon, more commercial, more industry, those are heavy volume users. School district, a new school building, all of those are heavy volume users, and that plays a role. And I think what we're seeing is that part of that dynamic.
Yeah, it plays a role in the sense that can be more stable revenue, but we have to be in a position to be able to meet that demand, and provide that connection and meet that aggregate or that incremental amount of water that we have to provide those customers. Once we have them, they tend to be relatively stable. At the other extreme, and this is more the exception to your point than the rule, is the large industry that might be a very significant water user subject to seasonal variation or to changes in the business climate. For some of our clients, high-tech, Intel can be varied. Bottling companies. In Denver, we have the Pepsi facility, and that you can see seasonal swings. And at the extreme, the ice maker. Yeah. So, okay. So any other questions, comments? I'm going to turn it over to Rocky to start really getting into what drives our financial plan. Now we're starting to talk dollars and cents. Rocky?
Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for your time this morning, Board. We're going to walk through the financial plan and financial plan scenarios. This first section will be more of a high-level approach to the financial plan as well as the assumptions that we made for the financial plan. At that point, we'll transition into some of the scenarios we were explored and we definitely want to share with you, but really, as kind of mentioned in the beginning, there really is only one option that we're kind of coming today with a recommendation that we use in further analysis going forward. So with that, with any study, one of these things, we essentially have three primary steps. One, we want to project the usage, the charge revenue over a forecast. Secondly, we want to look at the O&M and capital expenditures over that particular forecast. And third, we want to look at what we actually need to change in terms of user charges to meet that particular revenue requirement. Now, it's important to note that this was a really big part of our project so far. And because long-term financial planning is becoming more and more important in every study that we're doing. And you know, a while back it might have been, you know, a 5-year financial plan was really, you know, you're good within 2 to 3 years, but let's look at 5 just to see what that looks like. And we're really seeing a lot of demand from our customers to look even further out. While our 5-year forecast is what we're zeroing in on today, we do have a 10-year forecast within our financial planning model that we provided to the city. And it's once again, it's really important to do that. We're finding that there's demand for that because not only the benefit in that is we're trying to identify needs, and yes, in years 5 through 10, that you start to make a lot of assumptions in that period of time, but it's still better than not having one, and by that we're able to identify any spike in needs. We can identify any cliffs per se, and perhaps debt service falling off that we can then expect additional revenue or divert that, you know, to a different operating cost or capital cost. So it really is beneficial to have a really comprehensive as we can forecast, but understanding that really for our window, we're zeroing in on the 5-year. We feel best about those particular assumptions, about those costs involved, about the capital involved, but we do have that 10-year forecast in there. And essentially what we're highlighting here is that we'll get into some of the numbers a little bit later, but once again, this is what a long-term forecast really has. It says what's our baseline revenue going forward with no revenue adjustments. What are we expecting? Additionally, then we have this revenue requirement, which is the line above there, and then that blue is what do we need to increase or to change to meet that particular revenue requirement. And at this point we're showing here it's just a revenue adjustment, and that revenue can come from a number of different sources. It's just that in this business the primary mechanism for meeting revenue requirements is increasing user charges. So that's just the bottom line there. Getting into some of the assumptions that we've incorporated into this particular financial plan, we took a look at the baseline revenue and spent some time discussing that and deciding where that should be. And as my colleague showed a little earlier, we were showing a downtick in terms of the revenue that we were actually recovering on an annual basis versus what we were budgeting. And that number's continued to grow a bit. However, in 13 and 14, started to plateau a little bit, so we felt like they were two at least indicative years of what we could expect in the short term. And so for creating that revenue baseline going forward, we averaged the two of 13 and 14, and moving forward we expected no further decline nor increase actually as a conservative assumption for going forward. Once again though, with this particular user charge behavior, we wish we could come with you with a crystal ball and figure out what we expect in 2 years down the road and where consumption's going, but this is one of those variables that we have to make the best assumption possible and a conservative assumption, and then move forward with that. Second half of the slide is expenses. We use the 2015 budget as a starting point, but for forecast, of course, we don't want to leave that level because we anticipate a change in cost, just as everyone does in their own personal budgets. Much does the city should anticipate changes in those costs going forward. So we have a general cost inflation for most factors about 3%. For some of the specific ones listed here, you can see chemicals, that tends to be a little bit higher annual change at 4%, so we incorporate 4%, and health insurance for sure benefits. We see much higher than a general 3% increase, and we've received feedback from staff that anticipated 8% per year, at least through our forecast, is not unreasonable.
So that's per year, that's not?
That is correct, that is per year.
Not across the 5 years?
Yes, sir. We will say this, and we've said it, and we will say it again, it is definitely a capital-intensive industry, and so while the O&M costs do change, and we do increase those as years go on, they tend to be much more of a fixed, anticipated cost Capital, however, seems to be the biggest driver in any of the rate increases that we tend to see across our industry. So looking at the capital needs of this particular community, we have kind of within our general CIP, we have water main replacements, improvements. Also on the water reclamation side, we see, again, maintenance to lift stations and some reinvestment there. But by far the biggest one in our particular forecast moving forward is the future water supply project that Bill has shared a lot of information with you about. And we anticipate that in our particular financial plan in 17 and 18, and wanted to share some of those assumptions with you in our particular financial plan that is related to that future water supply project. Once again, we anticipate the cost to come in 2017 and 2018, primarily in 2018. I know that I believe you all recommended moving forward with a pilot program to get a better understanding of that timing when that needs to take place, and that will certainly impact our numbers. So our financial plan that we're going to be showing to you may change based on that pilot program and based on some of those, but our early assumptions are 2017, 2018, bulk of it, of the money that you would need, we would get a bond or state money, a loan in 2018. Additionally, we at this point are using 20-year term and conservative rate, interest rate of about 5% for those particular that issue. And then also we incorporated a shared financing between water and water reclamation, because really there will be projects within that $136 million. I know that's been thrown around. Within that $136 million, there will be projects on both sides. But there is important to note that there is no science behind this 45% to 55% split between water and wastewater. It's more from a financial planning perspective. We took a look at the financial planning, the burden on the water and the water reclamation side, looking at those particular customers, and the impacts of financing, kind of that shared, those debt service payments that we're anticipating. And from a financial planning perspective, we came up with this 45 to 55 split, which at this point is one of the more favorable splits in terms of sharing that particular cost.
So does 5% seem reasonable on a 20-year bond? What's our current rating? No, as far as tax-free stuff from the banking side, we're in the low 3s. And so I'm trying to figure out, is that a fixed rate for 10? Or, how are we going to?
Our intent here was to be conservative. And in fact, Rocky mentioned state funding, and absolutely, we believe we can get less than 5%. But worst case scenario, if we were to go to the bond market, we wanted to be conservative. Even today, the bond market's going to be in the less than 4.5. So this is a conservative estimate, which is one of the reasons that this plan needs to be updated each year, and the tool we're going to leave the city to do that. We would much rather come in at less than 5% than use a number and end up coming in over that. So it's just a conservative posture.
Okay.
And it is important to note, we had the city consult their financial advisor on that, and that was the recommendation. So,
Okay.
okay. Part of our financial plan, while we have the operating costs, and then we have the second bucket, the capital costs, those are by far the largest requirements of our financial plan, or the revenue requirements. But an important point that we've been stressing is we want to get the utility to financial sustainability, not just financial sufficiency to meet the annual revenue requirements, but sustainability. And in doing so, we've identified certain targets. The city has identified certain targets that they would like to meet, and feel like by meeting those, we can be very fiscally responsible, financially sustainable, and be able to weather some ups and downs, as we are definitely inevitably going to experience in this particular industry. So here we show some of those metrics that we aim to achieve throughout our forecast, and our forecast assumes that we achieve all of these by 2020. Some of them we've already achieved, but some of them we also need to work at, and so we need to have those included in the revenue requirement to meet those. And right here we have days cash on hand in particular. Our goal is to have 75 days for both the water and the waste and the water reclamation utility. And right now in the water reclamation, we are actually above 75 days, which I'll show here in just a few moments. The water side, we are not. And so that is something that we work toward in our financial plans. And also the debt service coverage. Right now our target is about 1.25. We typically get GO debt here, so it's backed by the taxing authority, and therefore that does not have a requirement above 1.0. But it is important to note that as we go forward, especially with a project as big as the Future Water Supply Project, to continue to try to maintain a 1.25, which is essentially just 25% above what the anticipated debt service would be in revenues available for payment. And so we've identified that as a particular goal, and also that will come into play if we need to go to the revenue bond market. That is definitely a requirement. Where you got to be. Yes, yes, sir. So
can you clarify the debt service coverage to date is 1.08?
the debt service coverage today for the city, I don't believe we have that. I guess we have that calculated. We'll actually see that because I have a chart on that in a little bit.
Okay.
But the requirement is just to be above 1, so because it's backed by a taxing authority. All right. Now we're going to get into the scenarios, and you'll get to see some numbers, a number of graphs. Might be easier to see your charts on your page. I know we tried to squeeze a lot in, so I will forewarn you about that. But we're really looking at 3 scenarios, and as I mentioned, though, we like the last one. We're coming forward, or coming to you with that recommendation of the last one. But the first one is the do nothing, and that's really to show that if we did not have any user charge revenue increases, what it would look like in terms of the key metrics, the debt service coverage, the days cash on hand. What would that look like? The second one is what we're dubbing as maintain. And really what that means is we still need a sizable increase in 2016 to, quote unquote, right the ship. We need to get back to that revenue sufficiency that, especially on the water side, that we need to just, again, it's a fiscally responsible as a utility. We meet some financial targets, and we feel pretty good about that. But that does not include any assumptions with the Future Water Supply Project. That's going forward with your current water supply. And that's weathering the storm as to whether we have more drought and that shrinks, or we roll the dice and see if we're okay with that. So there's nothing involved with adding additional capital investment there. And then the third one we dubbed moving forward. And really that includes the costs associated with the Future Water Supply Project. That's really where we'd like to see the city go. Once again, we'd love to, need to have that water supply in place so we can be attractive to businesses, industry, et cetera. And so that project in particular really helps the city move forward in securing that water supply and the future of the community. Do nothing. The blue bars show where our revenue requirement is, and the red line is where our current revenues are projected to be. And so ideally we'd like that line above the revenue requirements or at the revenue requirements, but as we can see that we're projecting a shortfall each and every year. So this is assuming user charge rates, that are in place now through 2020 with no changes to those particular charges.
So does the 2015 numbers include all the new motel, hotels that are involved, or how did y'all extrapolate that to show that increase over the next 5 years?
Right now, we are not including that as any additional revenue beyond what was included in kind of an average of 2014 and
You're simply
13.
doing as is, basically, if nothing changes today, or
Yes.
No population increase, nothing, just
Yes, sir.
nothing
static,
up,
totally
nothing down,
static.
just
Correct.
status quo.
Correct. Because at this point, we know that there was a significant decline in consumption over the past couple years. But as we looked at the revenue numbers and whatnot, it seemed to plateau a little bit in 13 and 14. So while we saw a significant decline in 12 and then to 13, we saw it level out a little bit. And so we felt that was a conservative estimate to assume that what we've experienced in 13 and 14 would be what we experience going forward. Now, that's not to say that residential decline per capita, or excuse me, usage per capita may continue to decline a little bit, whether that's through additional conservation measures or even people updating their homes with LOFO fixtures or appliances and things like that. But then if you experience any growth, that's kind of, that offsets some of that. So it's really competing between what growth that you expect versus any additional conservation or decline in consumption that you see.
So all three of your models that you came up with are basically taking the same assumption.
Yes, sir.
Okay, flat, not up, not down. Got it.
Yes,
okay.
sir.
And just from a point of me, I'm the guy that I've already flipped 3 or 4 pages back there, and so I'm interested in getting to the next part. I know you got to do the do nothing. I don't think anyone on this board is interested in doing nothing, but.
I put an X on my pages.
But
All right. Well, we will move
get the
forward
point of-
quickly through them. All right. Sounds good.
The do nothing really states the obvious.
I know.
Understand.
we
And you got to
can't
do it.
sustain.
We know that, but
Yes.
Right. And not only, I believe everyone here in particular knows that it wouldn't be sufficient revenue and whatnot, but sometimes looking at, for example, the fund balance, seeing that go into the negative on what we're anticipating really goes a long way in terms of showing that it's not just
It's not sustainable.
Exactly right. It's
Bottom
it's going to be bad. Well, just how bad? You're actually going into the negative.
Yeah.
And similarly on coverage, we're nowhere near our target. And frankly, we go below 1.
with that said, I mean, I do think it's important that some of this information does get disseminated to the proper people out there so they understand that we can't do nothing, that doing nothing is not an option.
Yep.
Right.
So while we understand that it does need to be disseminated through media and such like that, marketing.
Great.
Okay.
So the slide that's up right now just shows that coverage, and once again, it drops below 1 even. So we're showing that we wouldn't even make debt service payments at this point. So it just, as you mentioned, it's really not an option, but it is a baseline saying we're throwing our hands up and we're not going to do anything about it. And this just shows the customer bill. In subsequent ones, you'll see how that inclines over the year or over the forecast, but this shows it flat at existing levels at 4,000 gallons in a 5/8 inch meter, what we've dubbed as our typical customer here in San Angelo. The second scenario is maintain. And what we mean by maintain here is that, as I mentioned, we still have that initial significant rate adjustment or user charge adjustment in that first year to get back to revenue sufficiency and also to begin meeting our financial targets, because we feel that is very important and still needs to be incorporated into the second scenario, which while it does not include future water supply, it's still important to show that the financial targets are important and for this utility going forward. We're also showing, but it does not include any new capital projects and it does not include any new debt service. But as you can see on the right there, these are the user charge revenue adjustments, more across the board revenue adjustments for all rates. So every customer would see their bill go up by X% within this particular table. And as you can see on the water side, we need a 20% initial from 2015 to 2016 to quote unquote right the ship and get it back. Once again, we saw that where our projected revenue is below that of what we've been budgeting, so we really need to get that number back up. And then on the water reclamation side, we need a 13% first initial adjustment, and then after that, only 1.25% over the next 4 years. And I forgot to mention, in the water side, we're looking at 5% per year, and that primarily is to start building up to that 75 days cash on hand. That's a huge driver of those 5%, is to meet that target by the end of the forecast.
Question, Bill,
Yes.
does this include total infrastructure replacement on what we've got within the city? And I'm kind of primarily talking about the city now, to stop all the breaks in main service and everything.
The maintain does not. It just continues at the level that we're continuing.
Yes,
Well, but I'm not. Right now, we're spending what, 1.3 million
About that, right.
approximate,
Right.
to replace 30,000, how many feet? I remember
A
the
lot.
number, I just don't have, a lot, yeah. Anyway, I mean, and I know that that's still a drop in the bucket, but that still should be included as part of this projection, correct?
Well, it should be, and I guess the question is how much should we increase that? I don't think that.
Not talking increasing, I'm just talking maintaining with what we're currently doing today.
Oh, that is in this, correct?
Yeah, which, again, just so, the way I projected the thing out is basically a 40-year cycle for us to go through and replace every,
Or, yeah, 40
and that's
plus.
just to start over again.
And that's correct.
Right. And so, excellent point, that this, while we show the changes that we anticipate in operating costs that I referred to earlier, the capital assumes the existing level of capital investment that is occurring today for per year going forward for each of those.
We all probably agree that's totally insufficient.
Right. One other point I'd like to make, again, we're showing percentages here. And before, we have a slide where we get to it, but 20% increase. The average residential bill today is about $32. 20% increase takes it to about $37, $38. So it's an increase of about $6 to $7 per month. I think it's important to note that 20% is I'll say what everybody's thinking, it's an alarming number. $6 to $7 per month for the typical residential customer. High volume users, depending on the rate design, it will be more. They're using more water. But for your average San Angelo residential customer, about $6 per month. And so we have a slide that shows that, so I'll let Rocky move along, but I wanted to provide that perspective.
Gotcha. Okay, moving forward.
Under this maintain scenario, we wanted to show you the water utility and the water reclamation utilities total revenue requirements. The red line, once again, is the existing revenues. The I guess it's more of a gray line that pops up and shows the anticipated revenue after those revenue adjustments in the previous table. And we just felt important to note that on the left side, on the water utilities, one might point out that the line is above the revenue requirements, and that's because we're working up to that 75 days cash on hand. And that's shown here, as we can show that we're meeting our kind of individual fund targets of 75 days cash on hand. On the water reclamation side, as I mentioned, we're already there, and we're starting to kind of spend some of that down a little bit, so that's on a little bit of a downtick. But on the water, it takes us 5 years to get there based on those particular revenue adjustments that we showed. Coverage, it gets us above our 1.25 coverage target, so we feel like that's a strong position for the utility to be in. And so we wanted to show that we actually achieved that and maintain that over the life of the forecast. And as Rick mentioned here, we're showing the change in total customer bills, or for a 4,000 gallon customer, 5/8 inch residential. And basically, once again, we're showing right now it's combined, we're about $51 for 4,000 gallons. Over the forecast, that goes to, in 2020, $79 per month for the, so changing approximately $28 over 5 years. Okay. This is the final slide on the maintain before we get into the next one. Does anyone have any questions regarding the maintain scenario?
Bill, my question is, I still go back to balanced budget. I know our federal government doesn't understand what that means. But here, I think when we look at this, whatever parts we pull out of it and think we need to adjust it, I'm more interested in how the city works as a whole. It's still revenue cost to an individual, what you're talking about. So I want to go, when we get there, go a step further and say, do we have excess money in our budget overall? We can transfer from one side to the other. I want to look at it globally from a city standpoint and know if part of the city somewhere else can handle some of this increase. Does that make sense?
I think can I even throw out one more pointed question exactly on that? And that's the general fund transfer. I remember that from a few years ago, but I'm a little bit of a fog there, and I really would love to be reminded exactly what that means.
Two questions, and I'll try to respond to both.
Okay.
The first point, Mr. Boyd, about other general fund revenue sources that may be used. This is a conservative financial plan in that we have not
I know.
included any potential sales tax revenue that might be used. That's a decision I think that ultimately could be made by council.
Right.
There is, I'll term it, a significant amount of sales tax revenue that could, under today's standards, be used to help fund this project we're talking about. What we're showing today is a plan where it's 100% user-based. Okay, so it's something that the city could consider down the road. Secondly, on the general fund transfer, I'll let others chime in, but the general fund transfer is intended to reimburse the general fund for the support services that they provide the utility operations. So to the extent legal, finance, human resources provides a function, a support, a service to water or water reclamation, that transfer to the general fund is indicative of the cost of those services provided.
I had
Mr.
argued
Chairman,
a few years ago that I did not quite concur with the numbers and the ratios because at that point in time, and I'm talking probably back in 2012 and such like that, the water we were in a little better shape on water. We were a little better shape on our water fund, and maybe back in 2010, that I thought those were slightly extreme because I felt like we were kind of digging at one of the good revenue sources to get some extra cash into the general fund, being blunt about it.
And I think things have changed a bit since then, and it's more indicative of service provided and cost associated with that service. But your question, I guess, raises a good concept, and one that we follow with utilities around the country, is from a starting point, water service, water reclamation service is one that the industry, the courts, et cetera, have viewed best paid for through user charges versus taxes. Taxes have no relationship to the service I'm provided when it comes to water and water reclamation. And going back decades, that's how these utilities were funded. If you think about it, before we had water meters and could measure water use, by and large, most communities used taxes. And over time, the user charge structures have evolved to now where we know how much water I'm using, and shouldn't I pay for that? We don't know how much police or fire or park service I'm using. So taxes are a great revenue source for that. But in terms of taxes for water and water reclamation service, it loses its nexus or connection between the service provided. That's not to say it's not done. It's done in diminishing ways today than it was in the past. And enough of my soapbox.
But that's not a disagreement with, I think, anything that's been said here. It's always been my belief that I believe that the water utilities should be treated almost like a separate company. Standalone, stand on its own, it's got to make its money, it's got to do all that kind of stuff. I guess my point goes back to the general fund transfers, that I want to ensure that whatever general fund transfers are fair and reasonable, proper, appropriate. That's all I'm trying to say on that. Now, I know that's a different argument for different people. Hi, Daniel. So,
I mean, I agree. I just think you got to have full disclosure. If we're going to do this and talk about an increase for something that we need to educate our citizens on the whole picture. That's it's a separate issue, but I think water utility stands on its own also. But in order for us to sell it, well, they don't have to take it with as a bad pill. I want us to look at doing that, at least make that recommendation.
now, again, and I may be elaborating too much on this, but the point you're making on the sales tax revenue is that we do have our 4B sales tax that we did allocate during the election in 2012? 10. That did allocate, once we got certain projects done, it allocated a large percentage, up to 72% of that, to long-term water sources that could go in to help cover some of the debt coverage of all this stuff.
And you may be going to get there, so, or at least a recommendation.
Are you factoring any of that in there?
Today, we are not getting there. This does not reflect, all the information we're presenting today, it does not reflect any use of that sales tax revenue authorization that you refer to.
Okay, thank you.
But
We'll
as you
quit
pointed
asking
out,
questions.
that may be able to provide some rate relief down the road
Okay.
if it would be used. The third scenario we've dubbed moving forward, and it essentially builds on the maintain and then incorporates the costs associated with the future water supply project, and those being primarily in our financial plan, those related to debt to fund that $136 million, both on the water and the water reclamation side. As you can see here, we still get to do some of the existing cash level or cash funded capital items that we're doing right now, as well as adding in that future water supply project, and yet we still also achieve our financial targets of 75 days and debt service coverage. So, but and as you can see on this one, we're for both water and water reclamation, we're financial plan is 20% for the first year and then 10% per year through 2020.
My point on bringing up the 4B is that I believe that probably somewhere between your maintain and your moving forward is a reality. I think the moving forward is a high end, and maintain is probably the low end of that scale. Somewhere in the middle of that is going to be probably a more reality for us to get to the ultimate goal of where we all want to be.
I could not have said it better. And
I just didn't want,
until-
when people see this, I don't want them to get, holy cow.
I mean, if moving forward gets published, it's, shoo, we're behind the
Yeah.
power curve from day one.
Yeah, people will be jumping at us.
And at this stage, we have not had an opportunity to visit with city council. And obviously, this is our first chance to visit with the board. So we have not had the opportunity to get any direction regarding the use of that sales tax revenue. So we were hesitant to bring forward a scenario to this board that, for example, showed use of 100% of that available sales tax or any percent
Any
of
of
that. So essentially what you have, as you've recognized, is what I would term a worst-case scenario.
Gotcha. A lot of variables we need to
And-
figure into it and determine what they are and pick and choose them and then look at putting a plan together for
Absolutely.
public.
And as Bill said at the start, what we're looking for today from the board is some direction on all of these issues. And specific to the sales tax, it could be, look, staff and Raftelis, you need to go back and develop a scenario that uses the maximum net sales tax that's left over that could be used for this project and bring forward that plan. That
Yeah.
could be an option, yes.
Knowing that allocation, it's written in law. I mean, there's not a whole lot of variable allowed in that. It's very, very, very specific.
That it goes to water projects.
Long-term water.
But it doesn't stipulate to what extent
Doesn't
or any of
stipulate to
that.
which
what-
long-term
Right.
water, but it does stipulate long-term water supply.
Right.
And it's our
Not
understanding
for
that council has
roads, not for anything.
determines what level that is, though, is that correct?
It can be up to 72%, right? And that's the way.
That is
That's correct.
allocated by law. It is written in the law. The way it is, there's a percentage of the way that thing is allocated. There were projects that were written up right up front. When those were paid off and went down, then everything, all of that fell down below that line into that long-term water supply. And
May
there's
I-
the affordable housing line that goes in the midst of that, and then there is economic development that's again, those are definitive, written.
And I think that discussion is good, and I don't know if this board is going to be able to provide the guidance that you're looking for. As the representative from the Development Corporation and Economic Development, and Mr. Hirschfield is correct, and we have a ballot, and we have the ballot language that allows up to 72%. I think we need to have the discussion, because at some point, my question has always been, how long do we have that up to 72%?
Forever.
The law can be changed, and so that's what I'm saying is, if it's a possibility that in the discussion and in the formula, we're able to determine that we can use less than the 72%, I'm very interested in that, because when I compete against other cities, I really don't have the tool chest that other cities have when they're actively recruiting and when you look at those dollars available to incentivize. So anyway, for me, it's a discussion that I welcome.
I'm not in disagreement with anything you said, because I too am a big proponent of economic development and using that fund for that. However, when this ballot was written, when the language was written down, defined, I distinctly remember sitting with Alvin New, Harold Dominguez. We talked through, we lined out, and because everyone defined that long-term water was so vital that it didn't matter how much economic development we could do if we didn't have water. It's all for naught.
Totally.
It's all for naught. We don't have people, we don't have infrastructure, we don't have anything. So anyway.
And I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you there.
Just if I can, real quickly, just to say that we've had a lot of internal discussion about how to fund these projects, and that's obviously one of them. But this discussion that you're having needs to take place, and so we ultimately figure out what money we have and what would be available for to offset some of the debt service or for infrastructure improvements. What we wanted to show here is where we are and without that, what it would take. There's obviously some other financing options that we will, as we get feedback from you and the council, we'll begin to refine that to get to what the ultimate structure would look like.
And to piggyback on that too, is we also wanted to demonstrate that to get to financial sufficiency and sustainability, regardless of the future water supply project, we'll take an initial user charge revenue in that first year.
Yeah.
Then the future supply project will impact further years in the forecast, and any other revenue that we can bring in to kind of offset that will provide some rate relief in that forecast, but that initial year is really to get our revenues up where we need them to be to meet the revenue requirements that we expect.
So we can move forward,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just see a working group needed between this board and the council at some point in time with all of our options, all the facts, and we can pick and choose and see what a couple of different scenarios with your help, what makes sense and what would work. To where you have some type of capital improvement reserve sitting there, in my opinion, that would sustain us over a normal growth period, including all the hotels and the things that we're seeing, because it will come back and it'll dip and flow over a period of time. But I think it's going to take both groups to get together and figure out the options.
Absolutely. That's the kind of direction that needs to be reflected in this plan. And just to be clear, what Rocky's showing here, the 20% increase in 2016, there are not sales tax dollars available in that year to offset that increase in any material way. The benefit of those dollars would really be in future years.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Please, Rocky.
Okay. At this point, I'll just move through the charts specific to our moving forward. They're the same charts, but this goes to show you where those particular costs go. And as you can see here, we're showing the water utility fund. Our revenue is meeting revenue requirements after the adjustments. And once again, we have a little bit of cushion on the water utility side, and I hesitate calling it cushion, but essentially we need it to meet our 75 days target, which we're showing here is getting our funds to a healthy level on an annual basis. But for the water side, we do show it be in a process. We're not trying to get there overnight. Otherwise, that 20% would be higher because we need it to get to 75 days. But so with that in mind, we realize that it's something that we want to systematically chip away at until we achieve it at the final year in our forecast for the water utility side. This also shows that we maintain that 1.25 coverage target. You'll see a dip in specifically in 18 and a little bit in 19 too. That's when the full debt hits that we anticipate for the future water supply project. Once again, though, we are conservatively estimating 20 years and 5%. So that also may, as we get nailed down those numbers, may provide a little bit of relief as well.
I mean, realistically, don't you think that's twice what you could possibly get that interest rate for? I mean, for some SWIFT funding, you're talking about 2.25%.
The one concern, did you actually? Go ahead. The one concern about the state money that's been raised is that if we move forward If we move forward with the future water supply project very quickly, then we would most likely be the manager and we're construction manager at risk. And apparently, the state isn't as confident in that particular approach, and therefore the concern is that we don't have full funding from the state. Whereas if we get the full funding from the state, then yes, we anticipate a much less interest rate.
So what does that mean in timing then?
The current plan that has been proposed has about a 5-year plan on the project. To speed that up, we might have to look at some other delivery methods, and just because of the uncertainty with the state funding with that, we wanted to use a conservative approach if we have to go to the market.
Good.
Okay. This shows the typical customer bill for residential, 4,000 gallons, and after those particular user charge revenue adjustments, we see a combined bill of approximately $51 from where we are now to $90 in 2020. So, with that, just wanted to summarize the scenarios. The do nothing is obviously no changes. We violated our fund targets and are insufficient on our debt service coverage as well as our payments in later years. And no new capital projects. The maintain one, we target that, we want to meet our financial sufficiency and sustainability in terms of our financial targets, but we do not have any new capital projects, and we only maintain the existing level of cash funded capital. In the moving forward scenario, which is really the one that we're recommending that we move forward with an additional analysis, is incorporating the future water supply project in all financial plans moving forward. So, and then that, but in terms of the specific assumptions and or whether we have additional revenue and whether we ramp up any additional other CIP funding is certainly something that we're asking for direction today. With that, we'll move into the rate structure discussion.
Thanks, Rocky.
This would probably be a good time for a break if that's something that you want. If not, we're probably looking at another, 45 minutes or so?
Potentially, yes.
You want a 5-minute break? Let's take it.
Sure.
Before we move on to rate structures, Rocky closed with this summary, and I wanted to take the board's pulse at this point about a preferred approach. And I'm not asking for a specific recommendation, but as I say, almost a straw man of, from a financial planning standpoint, are there one of these three scenarios or some variation thereof that we should be moving forward with? And if I were to be so bold as to presume anything, we had a lot of discussion about the sales tax. And that's not shown in these scenarios in any way, shape, or form. So clearly, in our mind, that is something that we need to incorporate and explore and better understand how much is available, and city staff has given us some information, what the legislative legal requirements are for using that. But I'll be quiet now and and let the board respond to my request for maybe some guidance on the financial plan.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Sure.
The question in my mind currently is that in all three scenarios, you have one water supply project. And of course, what I'm thinking of is future water supplies, next 50 years, next 100 years, and what are those future water supply projects? Does this allow the need that we have? And if not, are we going to be subject to increase rates, a different rate structure? And that's kind of what's going through my mind now.
But aren't these, I mean, kind of tagging on that, isn't it, you're setting this out as a 20-year note. So essentially in 20 years, we've got that one paid off. So in another 20 years, we could start another project. And then without a whole lot of differential in the rate structure? Fair statement or not?
Not necessarily. The presumption there, and I wish it worked that way, is that, well, we won't need another water supply project until 20 years, is not the case. It would be great if the timing of water supply matched the repayment of debt. That rarely ever happens. And so if we're successful in economic development and so on, we will likely need more water projects sooner. We will have rate increases in the future. Beyond the 5-year window we're looking at, there will be rate increases because there are going to be infrastructure needs, renewal and rehabilitation, but there will likely be other water supply projects that will be needed as well. And so
just replacement cost, just cost of product going up. I mean, I know you've got a conservative, but we've seen how that's
a driver as
supply and
well.
demand goes crazy.
Capital is the key driver here. O&M goes up, and we can deal with that. So capital, as Rocky indicated, that's the key driver for a utility. And I know there are longer-term water supply needs that some maybe are on the horizon, others are too far out to even begin looking at. And one of the issues we have with utilities is we must do long-range planning. And so we're taking a little bit of the let's walk before we run approach, in that we know we need approximately a 20% increase in revenues tomorrow to get us on the right path. We know, or we've identified, a long-range supply project that is in the order of $130, $140 million. That gets us started.
But we're not even including the Rotorua project.
Right.
So you got, I think several things. We've got to include that, if you're asking us. We've got roughly 18% of our water supply comes out of the Hickory.
What's the ballpark on the Rotorua, remember?
Depends if it's 3,000 or.
We're going to quantify that, but
Just a ballpark.
legally, they could transfer 5,000 acre feet a year.
What was the
But the
ballpark
cost is
budget?
high on.
Budget,
5,000.
20 million.
Okay.
But that's 18% from the Hickory Aquifer. If we could do reclamation, that's roughly 80% from previous conversations. We do the Rotorua, that could be another 15 to 20%, depending on how it rains. But to me, I always look at it with a 20% margin factor, and I think we need to do that. So, there's about 15 different variables in there. I think we've got to be somewhere on the right side of maintain. If we don't, we're losing ground.
Right.
Okay?
Absolutely.
Whatever that right side is, it's not a moving forward. I want to have, when we look at it from a 5-year perspective, I want to fight this battle one time. I want to present it to city as a whole, county as a whole, and we've got to include the county because the rates that happen out there, since they're a purchaser of water for us, for our rural, of which I'm included, it's significant. It's going to be really significant. But I want to look at it, I want to try and pick all the variables, put out the best scenario, we know it's not 100% product, and give it to the public one time. They know what to plan for. If I know I'm going to go up $10 or $12 a year as a normal usage of 4,000 gallons, then tell me that so I can plan for it over the next 5 years. I
And-
don't want any surprises a year, 18 months, 2 years down the road.
And to that point, we've had significant discussions internal about going forward to council with a 3 to 5 year plan and, adopting a series of revenue increases and publishing the rates that would result from that and adopting that by ordinance for a 3 or 5 year period so that a future council does not have to take any action. Future council can always rescind, but they would not have to take any action. And part of that determination of 3, 5 years is the comfort level and certainty we have. Now, if we adopted a 5-year plan and circumstances change, staff could come forward with a
rate
modified, yes, Mr. Boyd, absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
You'd want to do that. You hope you'd have enough revenue generation from a water supply to increase your revenue, that you can say, hey, instead of 10%, we're doing 8.5%.
It would
for
be
this year.
wonderful that we were
That's
so
what you would hope.
conservative that, we got that debt for 4% versus 5 or even less. And all these other factors fell into place, and the drought was lifted and water sales were higher. We still had efficient water use, not wasteful, and we generated more revenue. So, yeah, there's opportunity, but I think, and Rocky alluded to this, that as we go to the capital markets, whether it's the state or traditional capital markets, if council adopts a multi-year plan, that sends a little more security to the lenders. They know where the city is headed, and management, governance of the city has shown a willingness to step up and raise the rates and treat this as a business, and not subsidize it.
Well, I'm highly in favor of a kind of a long-term approach, a long-term plan that could be, that the council could define out and just set kind of as a normal course of action. This is going to happen. This is a long-term plan. It's going to happen. Because what scares me to death, absolutely terrifies me to the nth degree, is that tomorrow it rains, and 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 it rains. We're all good. We don't need to raise our rates now. And then everything is rescinded and gone. It doesn't take away from the fact that we still live in a desert, and it's gonna happen again. And that's the point that I don't want anyone to ever forget, whether it's the council, and I think this group up here is very cognizant of this, and that's one of our driving forces, but we have to be looking well beyond the rain that may happen tomorrow that may get our lakes quarter, 20, 30, 40%. That's not a forever thing. And we want to try to be developing scenarios and projections and programs that last well beyond our tenure on this board and well beyond the El Nino that we may or may not, have. So that's one of my fears. So the longer term, more aggressive we can be on, number one, putting a program together sooner rather than later, and addressing that quickly, and being aggressive and conservative in your approaches with a long-term approach, I'm highly in favor of.
Anybody else? I mean, 1.25 to me is the minimum in the banking environment. You're talking about debt coverage. 75 days is cutting it pretty close still. 90 days is what you look for to be optimum, to get the best rate we can out there. Can we do a state funding and a private placement of that debt? Can that be split? Is that possible?
Yes, as far as, yes.
So let's look at, that's something I think we ought to do. If we can pick up a 2.25 or 2.5 and we go fund the rest of it for a little bit higher, let's look at that. Does that give you enough? I know it's broad, but.
No, it does. Thank you very much. And as we walk away from this meeting, we'll be thinking about now next steps in terms of bringing information back to this board, onto council, and how we proceed. So thank you on that topic. I think I feel pretty good about the feedback on the financial plan.
Okay.
And so let's move on now to that sort of second and third question of, we know we need X amount of revenue, which of the customer classes should be paying for it, and then how do we charge those classes? And that gets us into the area of rate structure alternatives. And these scenarios, as we move forward, are all based on the moving forward financial plan. So the 20% increase, the 10% that follow after that. And so again, this is what we would characterize, I think, as, I hate to use the word worst, but it's the highest, most conservative scenario. And as you said, Mr. Boyd, we hope we end up somewhere right of the maintained scenario and left of the moving forward scenario. So that's basically what we're showing here, the baseline. And the baseline, and again, Rocky mentioned this earlier, under the baseline, we take today's rate. If today's rate's $1, then tomorrow it'll be $1.20. And then next year, it'll be $1.32. 10% on top of that. And so all the rates, all the charges on the system will go up by these percentages. So every customer on the system next year can expect to see a 20% increase in their bill if they don't change their water use habits. Okay, so this is a great place to always start. We don't change your structure. The advantage you have of your structure is that customers are generally aware of it. And if I were talking to customer service folks, they might tell me that customers are unhappy with it, but bottom line is it's what we have in place today. And so that's this first alternative number one. So we've talked about the user charge structure. It has two components, a fixed charge that customers pay regardless of the amount of water that they use. Just for being on the system, connected to the system, you pay a fixed charge. Most of your residential customers have a 5/8" meter, and they pay $19.12 per month. Okay? And that's what gets us to that, if you remember that earlier chart, 40% of our revenue is fixed on the water side. It's because of this fixed charge. Whether you use a gallon of water or not, you pay the fixed charge. And that covers the cost of having the meter in place, meter reading, customer costs associated with producing the bill, collecting the bill, those kinds of things, and then a base amount of infrastructure that we have in place to serve you whether you use any water or not. Okay.
Is how that gets allocated part of your study from more of an internal perspective of what the ratio of that fixed rate is going to each of those services and that infrastructure? And do y'all opine on how that could be improved or changed?
We do look in detail at that. Excuse me. So at a minimum, the fixed charge should be what I call a customer charge. It should recover all of those costs that we incur just to read your meter. Whether you use any water or not, we have to go out and read the meter. We have to maintain the meter. Ultimately, we have to replace it. So it should recover all of those costs. Then there are elements, as I said, baseline of your capital investment. And typically, this is what we call the distribution system, the small diameter pipe out there that we've had to put in and the utility, have to replace as it ages. And so that is a part of a basic level of service. And some portion of that is often recovered here. So to your point, now we're getting 40% of our revenue through this fixed charge. Under this first alternative, all of our charges go up 20%. All things being equal, we will still get 40% of our revenue from this fixed charge. And so we're going to share some information with you in a little bit about the impact this has on customers. I talked about low volume water users, and if we were to take the fixed charge even higher, it has a negative impact on them, disproportionate. You'll see some of that in a few minutes. Okay.
Sorry, that's going to shorten that term of replacing our infrastructure. Does that make sense? Because we're going to have 20% additional, that little piece, 20% additional revenue.
Is what he's saying correct? That you're factoring that in, that would be a 20%, sorry, keep doing the mic.
If what is being said is that we're
I don't
going.
think so. I think if you go back to it, I think it's just to maintain.
Right.
That 20%, looking at both those scenarios,
We
to
just-
maintain and moving forward, the year one is basically just get us back to square one.
So that's just getting us back on par. That's
It
my
is.
question.
So
Okay.
that's not
It
an
is,
increase
yes.
in the infrastructure replacement.
Correct.
Got it.
Right.
Correct.
That will come in the
Just back on track.
subsequent years of the plan.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes. Okay. So this structure applies to all customers. It's based on their meter size. As your meter size increases, the cost of the infrastructure we dedicate to you increases, and hence the charge going today from $19 to $257. And by the way, if I'm an 8-inch customer, I am using so much water that this charge may seem high to you. They're going to be paying $310 a month. This is background noise in terms of their total water bill. Okay. Then, based on how much water you use, how much water passes through that meter, we have a volumetric rate. And this is a rate per thousands of gallons. No. Yeah, yeah. And you can see for our residential customers, we have a block structure. This is referred to as an inverted block. The more water you use, the higher the unit cost increases. If I use 5,000 gallons, I'm going to pay today $2.49 for the first two. Then for the next three, I'm going to pay $3.63. This is a conservation-oriented approach. The more you use, the more you pay. And it's also indicative of the cost of service. If I use a low amount of water, I typically don't need oversized facilities, storage facilities, to the extent larger volume water users do. Okay, so it has some relationship to cost of service. And as we'll share with you in a little bit, what is unique about this rate structure is the fact that we have 9 blocks. It's unique in that I've been doing this for 37 years. I've seen many blocks. I don't think I've never seen more than 9. You may be the most I've ever seen. You reach a point of diminishing return in terms of what your customers can understand, and that's illustrated by the columns to the right of this slide. The one that's labeled bill frequency tells us how many bills in a year are issued that have consumption in each of these blocks. If I used over 100,000 gallons, I would be in that last block. You can see we have no one, at least to the first decimal point in that block. Then the usage frequency says how much of our total residential use is billed at that rate. And once you get over about 39,000 gallons, there's not very much there. So I would ask, what are we accomplishing? And so we'll have some recommendations moving forward. But so sort of keep that in mind, that over 39,000 gallons, we're picking up less than 1% of our bills and just over 1% of our use. Non-residential customers, they are billed under a volumetric rate as well. Remember, they pay the same fixed base charge. And so here we're showing their rate and then what it would be with a 20% increase. And this is a uniform rate, all consumption. For our non-residential landscape, so this is where into the commercial building, there's a meter for domestic indoor use. There's a separate meter just for irrigating the outside, and you can see commercial apartment, mobile home, multi-park. And here the customer pays under a seasonal inverted. So if you look at the very first column, the 2015 rate, in the winter up to 89,000 gallons, the customer pays $4.04. But in the summer, for that same 89,000, they would pay $4.29. And this is indicative or reflective of the higher cost of meeting summertime demand. If everybody used the same amount of water every month of the year, our pipes would be this big. But because water use increases significantly in the summer, our pipes have to be this big, and our tanks. And that added investment sits idle in the winter. So it's not a very good way to run a system, but it's the only way to run a system. We have that summertime demand. So that's the sort of the thought process behind a seasonal rate approach. And again, all of these rates are being increased 20% under this scenario.
But if you still have that size of pipe to maintain, even though it's not being used, can there not be an argument made that, I mean, this is how it is, or do you recommend that you stay with that seasonal, or would we'd be better served by doing away with that?
We're going to get to a recommendation in just a few minutes. Yeah, well, we are recommending some changes.
Sorry.
You also provide a relatively small and significant amount of service untreated water to customers, and these are the rates that those customers pay under. Again, an inverted pricing structure. There's a difference between residential and non, and we'll have some recommendations for consolidating, modifying this structure. I believe your total annual revenues are somewhere on the order of $20,000.
That's the volumetric piece of it, but included.
Pardon me?
It's the volumetric piece of it.
Is about 20,000.
30,000.
Yeah, so it's pretty insignificant.
The lake.
I've got a question for you. So
Yes.
Wholesale rate is not included in here? Our
No,
wholesale customers? No.
we are not talking wholesale at all today.
Okay.
And many of your wholesale customers pay under a retail structure, if I'm not mistaken, per the contract terms. Okay, so changes we make to our retail structure would flow through naturally through the contract terms to those wholesale customers. You also see at the bottom of each of these slides a reference to outside city. You also have a relatively small amount of outside city retail service, and they pay 50% higher by policy. So whatever rates we're showing here, add 50%, and that would be the outside city rate. Water reclamation. Again, like on the water side, it's a fixed charge that varies by meter size. We're showing a 20% increase. There's also a volume rate that applies above 4,000 gallons. So that fixed charge here, and I'm going to go back, $19.81 for a typical residential customer. That includes 4,000 gallons of water reclamation or wastewater flow. And when you go above that, you pay this volumetric rate. Today it's $2.50. Residential customers are billed based on average water use, and it's an estimate of indoor use. Because when they're watering the grass, that doesn't get returned to the sewer system, the reclamation system. And so their bills tend to be pretty flat and static because it's an average. Non-residential, we charge under the same rate structure. We cap out the residential at the 15,000 maximum under the assumption that anything above 15,000 generally is outdoor water use and shouldn't be charged for wastewater water reclamation service. So alternative 2, so that was alternative 1, all rates go up 20% next year. Across the board. Alternative 2, we're going to look at a couple different things. And under any of these alternatives, we are not recommending anything different for the fixed charge. Fixed charge is going to go up 20%. And then what we do is when we look at each customer class, if we've determined that the residential class has a total cost of service of $10 million, we look at the amount of fixed charge revenue that would be generated by the residential class. Let's just say that's $2 million. We then design the volume rates to recover the remaining cost of service, or $8 million in my hypothetical. Okay? So that's our approach as we look at what each customer class should pay and the rates that they should pay. So alternative number 2, still a 20% increase in the fixed component and volume component shown here, but we're making some changes to reduce the number of blocks, those 9 blocks we had for residential, combine some of our non-residential classes for purposes of really customer understandability. Maybe more important is those additional blocks and distinctions really don't provide any value or any critical message to the customer. And then we're also looking to try to minimize significant bill impacts that might otherwise occur. So we have got a lot of things going on, but you can see same annual user charge adjustments, water 20%, 10%, and so on. So no change in the fixed charge. These are the same values we shared with you earlier. When we consider the block structure, the 9 blocks that we have for residential, again, looking back at the survey we conduct, you can see here we surveyed the cities that have increasing block rate structures. The dark bar represents the Texas utilities. 68% of Texas utilities have inverted block rate structures. Okay. Nationally, it's 50%. Below that, of those cities that have inverted block rate structures in Texas, 76% of them have 5 or fewer blocks, 3 to 5 blocks. Opposite fashion, then I would say 24% have more than 5 blocks. Okay, so just to illustrate, at 9 blocks, we're a bit of an outlier. And I would almost, Rocky's the RFC representative that does this survey. Rocky, do you recall any utilities having 9 blocks, or did you get that deep into it?
There is actually one that has 10.
10.
But,
in Texas?
No.
Okay.
Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission has a very interesting rate structure as well, but and they actually had 10. But I believe they're simplifying it. They're doing a rate study now to respond to simplification requests.
Right. So that's the key point, Mr. Boyd. Why do we have the structure if we're not billing any use or have any accounts that go to that volume? Or very few and insignificant. So
It adds more ink on the line for more lines and takes a bigger page and.
Right. It takes away from our ability to do other messaging on that customer's bill.
It's a nickel's worth of dog meat.
So our recommendation is consolidation of the tiers. So on the left-hand side, we're showing you the existing tiers, and then we're showing on the right-hand side the recommendation for 2016. Eliminate all the tiers over 39,000 gallons. And we're providing those same statistics of the amount, the percent of bills by block and the percent of use by block. So even in that 40 to 49,000 block, so we're going down to 5, we still don't have a tremendous amount of use or number of bills, but it is a significant consolidation from where we were before. Okay. And you can see the unit prices there. And so again, this maintains the same amount of revenue from the residential class that we were getting before. Okay. Non-residential, what we're doing here is consolidating all of the classes together. One volume rate for all non-residential water service. Not a significant change, quite frankly. Landscape, we're moving away from previously what we had in terms of the number of blocks, reducing those, and that's illustrated here from the 4 blocks to 2 blocks, up to 89,000 gallons and greater than 89,000 gallons. The non-res landscape rate here, again, we're consolidating that in terms of the number of blocks. It's consistent with the prior chart here. We're showing you the unit prices on the far right-hand side. Untreated water rate on the left-hand side, the 6 blocks that exist today. Moving this to a uniform rate. Again, in total, we get about $21,000 worth of revenue here. There's no real reason for having this complex inverted block rate, given the total amount of water sales, the number of customers there. Water reclamation, no changes. Under any of these alternatives, your existing rate structure makes sense, is consistent with industry guidelines and practices. So other than changing the unit prices as we need to generate more revenue, we're not really making any suggested changes there.
Right quick, on the
Yes.
reclamation, there's your wastewater base charge, but also on the city's bill, there's a wastewater usage fee. Is that a flat fee, and will that stay the same?
It is, and shown at the bottom of this chart is the makeup of that. So we're not making any change to that. You can see the unit prices increase 20% under this scenario from $2.50 up to $3. So no change in the structure, but yes, the unit prices will change. Now, this first scenario, first two that we've shown you, make no change in cost of service. Okay. All we've done is recovered the same amount, proportionate amount of revenue from the classes as you have in the past. Alternative 3A and 3B get to cost of service. And today we're in a situation, I talked earlier about the misalignment that occurs over time between major rate studies. Today your residential class is paying a bit more than they should, and everybody else is paying a bit less than they should. It's not that far out of line. We're talking in the 3 to 5% area. I've seen other utilities where I'm sharing information with boards and councils at this stage where one class is paying 20% more than they should and others are paying 20% less than they should. We don't have that kind of misalignment here. But nonetheless, we've developed two scenarios. Now, both of these reflect next year the status quo. We don't change customer class responsibility. We begin to right the ship, as Rocky said, and get us to that revenue that we need on a sustaining basis, 20% revenue increase. But under alternative 3A, the following year, we start to make steps. In 16, we do the 20% across the board. In 17, we start to make the first step to cost of service. In 18, the second step, and by 2019, we are at cost of service. Alternative 3B, that I'm also going to share with you, same thing in 2016, 20% increase. But in 2017, we immediately get to cost of service by customer class. So one is a transition. The other is, let's get there right away. Okay? Both, as the last bullet here says, once we're at cost of service, then we start moving forward with across-the-board increases, and that's what you've done in the past. That's what you would do in the future until you did another class cost of service study. And as I've said, there's really not a need to do that every year. The customer class demands and characteristics don't change that much year to year, but you should look at it periodically. So here we're showing the annual user charge adjustments by class. Fixed charge, no change there, as I said. But for the volume charge for residential, everyone's getting that 20% increase next year. But then in 17, we only need a 7.6% increase in the residential volume charge, not the 10% we were showing before. But we need a 12.85% increase in the non-residential. Because remember what I said today, residential's paying about 3 to 5% more than they should. Everybody else is paying 3 to 5% less. That's why we can get a 10% overall water revenue increase by having residential pay 7.6% and non-residential pay 12.85% more. Question, Mr. Hirschfield.
All of your scenarios here that you've got, basically, whether it's a 10% across the board, 7.6, whatever, and then assuming your 3B that you're going to show in a second, are all at the end of that whatever term is neutral on value, right? Basically the same. One didn't add up to more or less.
Yes, and what you're referring to is what we call revenue neutrality. So whether it's 2016, 2017, or 2020, we get the same amount of revenue each year. Under these two scenarios, we get that revenue from different customer groups.
Understand, but
Yes.
but again, it basically gives you the revenue neutrality, as you say.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And water reclamation, we really don't have cost of service issues there, so it's 10% across the board. We're fine. Okay. This goes into just a little more detail. Now, this is 3B. So under 3A, we took 3 years to get to cost of service. We took 2017, 2018, and 2019. Under 3B, we get to cost of service by class in 2017. And then thereafter, it's just across-the-board adjustments. So, similar presentation. Now, instead of that 7% increase for residential, because we were going to get there over 3 years, we're getting there in 2017, and we only need a 5.3% increase. So that 12% increase for non-residential now went up to 16. So this rights the ship immediately in 2017 and gets all the customer classes paying their respective cost of service. And then in the years that follow, it's just across the board. Okay. Let's look at the monthly bill impacts. This is water. Okay. Alternative 1, just to give you some orientation here. Well, this is for a typical residential customer using 4,000 gallons, 5/8-inch meter. If you look at alternative 1, that is across the board, 20% increase in fiscal year 2016, followed by 10% increases. Alternative 2 is the same. Alternative 3A is 20% in 2016, then we go to cost of service the next 3 years. 3B is 20% in 2016. So you see none of the values are any different in 2016. But then in 2017, we get to full cost of service, and then it's across the board thereafter. Bottom line, I mentioned we weren't that far out of alignment. So if you look at the bills in 2017, from $40.70 to $41.40, a distinction without a difference. Look at 2020. A little more difference perhaps. Okay. This is in part useful in looking at the financial plan as well. That, remember, this is the moving forward plan, the highest plan, where we're going from a water bill of $31.36 to a bill of $54 to $55. A $24 per month increase over 5 years. Okay. So again, in terms of the alternatives, it's not a real significant difference for that average user. Here we're showing you that average user in the middle at 4 gallons. On the far left-hand side, you'll see 4 gallons usage. That's the same data I just showed you on the prior slide, but we've shown a low-volume water user at 2,000 gallons and a high-volume water user at 15,000 gallons. And you can see the impacts under these 4 alternatives. And again, if you focus out into the difference really in, here we've just shown you 2016 and 2017. And for that low volume user, you can see an alternative. Well, again, it's the difference between $2.61 under alternative 4 and $2.89 if we continue business as usual. So there's a slight relief to that customer, but it's 28 cents from the high to the low. Okay. But what this does for you, in our opinion, and we're the rate technicians, it gets you to cost of service. It shows that the city's gone through a thoughtful technical process to examine the class cost responsibility associated with this plan and putting all classes where they should be. Okay? Now, you're fortunate that you're not that far out of alignment today, but this puts you where you should be, and you will not have any issues associated with one class claiming subsidy of another class. Whether it's small or big, it just won't exist under alternatives 3A and 3B. And the question is, how quickly do you get there? Not a big difference between 3A and 3B, and you could in fact move to 3B in 2017 and not have a very significant impact on your residential customers. The next chart shows for some of your non-residential, and here we've just selected a random building account that uses 50,000 gallons, a landscape account, and then a high-volume non-residential user at 150,000 gallons, and the impact that these alternatives would have on those customers. And so if you go to the bottom of this chart, alternative 3A versus 3B, 2016 to 2017. Remember, in 2016, everything's going up 20%. Under 3A, we take a first step towards cost of service. So for that large volume customer, you can see that their bill goes from, in 16, $1,262 to, in 17, $1,420. That's the first step to cost of service. If you look at 3B, their bill goes from $1,262 to $1,454. It's about a $30 a month higher bill because we've gone to cost of service immediately. And it's in the eye of the beholder whether that incremental $30 between those two alternatives is a hardship on a customer using 150,000 gallons. Overall, on the far right-hand side, we show you the change in the total bill going forward from what it is in 2015 to then 2016 and 2017. So it's still like the residential customer, it's a significant increase going forward, 20% out of the gate for everybody in 2016. Okay. Water reclamation, again, no changes are being recommended here. On this chart, we again just illustrate the 20% increase in 2016. Okay. For the typical residential customer, a low volume customer up to a high volume customer, this is the water reclamation bill for each of the years under this financial plan of a 20% increase followed by 10% increases. The bill would go from today for the low volume user of $19.81 to, in 2020, a bill of $34.80. So it's not a quite doubling, but it does increase under this moving forward highest case scenario. Okay. In similar fashion, we're showing you here the summary. So on the left-hand side, the financial plan, do nothing, which you might just put an X through that. It doesn't work. It fails on all of our criteria. Maintain doesn't allow us to move forward with capital, needed capital, long-term water supply. Moving forward does allow us to do that. On the rate structure side, quite frankly, the easiest thing to do is adopt across-the-board increases. Everyone sees the same percent increase year in and year out. All you would do then, that's an option. The other consolidation changes, I think, make sense in terms of collapsing that 9-block structure to a 5-block structure and some of the other changes. And then the cost of service. This, while we're not significantly out of alignment today, this allows us to stand up and say the residential class is paying their fair share, the non-residential class is paying their fair share. And that's the distinction between these alternatives. So a lot of information we've thrown at you. Obviously, you probably need some time to digest it, but Any initial reactions to this? I'm going to frame it as a high-level question. The notion of moving to cost of service. Do we have reactions that, Rick, if we just keep it the way it is and everybody pays the same % increase year in and year out, I support that? Or, Rick, it makes sense to go to cost of service and be able to say residential is this, non-residential is that. Any reactions on that question?
It seems like cost of service is a better equitable way, and maybe, none of this is an easy sell, but you've got a justification for why you're doing what you're doing. I think it pinpoints things more directly. And that points to this being water reclamation as being a self-standing, sustainably run operation. I think it points to that as well, more strongly than any other options.
Okay.
I think it's important that the public understand that when we talk about cost of service, we're a non-profit entity. I mean, we make no profit, so it's actually just the cost of doing business for that utility company and being able to recuperate those costs to be able to maintain and operate that utility. And so I think the public, while they can understand that, I think they need to know that.
I tend to, I'm going to stand. I think the cost of service is where we've got to be heading. Because again, I truly believe that this needs to be treated like a self-sufficient business. That it's just the way I think it should be run, and that gets us there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, to me, the marketing part of this plan is extremely important. How Anthony or whoever initially lays it out is how it's going to be perceived. So reclamations, as we know it with the new project, is a requirement because we don't have the water resources. No matter what we do, we don't have the water resources. I think everybody knows what infrastructure's like. I think they feel like it's very poor. It's got to be replaced, and it's got to be replaced sooner than what our current funding sources are. Because we all get tired of brown water or breakage or things that have. I mean, as long as it doesn't affect me, everybody seems to be okay. So we've got to fix that mentality. I think cost of service is where we've got to go. But how we lay that out in phases and how we explain that to the public is, to me, the biggest part of our duty and the city council's duty. So, to me, the last thing I think is, from my perspective, is I think we ought to have a work study with just us so we all understand it and we look at all the variables and the different things that fit in there. So if we get questioned and to make the proper recommendation to the council, I need some time to sort through it. I mean, you can list 40 different things and you got to kind of pick and choose and see how it affects us, both in the city and outside. And then when we do that, Bill, that makes sense to me that we sit down with council at that point and say, now it's time for us to get together, make sure we all understand the same thing, at least we know what the basic facts and what our options are before we really go forward from a public standpoint. That's just thoughts.
Yep.
What do y'all, if y'all disagree or whatever, please let me know. I'm trying to
I
piece
agree
it together
totally.
because it's huge.
No, it is very significant, and you've hit on a key element of this is engaging the public, communicating with the public about what it is we're proposing, why we're proposing it, really what it means to them and the community on a going forward basis.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I think
significant.
part of that is got to be demonstrating what savings are to be realized by doing that. If we're not constantly behind the curve fixing breakages and all of this, here's what we stand to gain, and this is why this will continue to put us in a better place. I mean, I don't know to what extent, we talk about all of this being predicated on gallons of water sold, but what about all that water loss in the system and the efficiencies to be gained there? I think there's a fair amount to be realized that will help our cause all the way around.
15% of our water usage is through breakage or something, or did I just hear that somewhere? It surprised me.
I think that's more of what the total loss would be. A percentage of that is through loss through breaks.
Okay.
It's obviously more than it ought to be.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big.
That's waste.
And that's a big number at the end of
And
the year.
that's treated water, too.
Yeah, that's expensive
So
water.
we've already spent the money.
Yeah.
Right.
So I
Where you
think that's
stand?
I do have a couple questions.
Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, what is our IV debt? When is that mature? Next year. Okay, so that will be,
That go away?
yeah, that will go away, so that will be a positive that would coincide with all this too. Again, I'm just trying to think of sales and marketing aspect of this thing too. And then also the model you've put together, looking at, that's something that the city will have access to, so they could also do some other scenarios and such. And the reason that I look at that is that I think what really got the city into trouble financially in the water department was that we went through a sustained drought, and while we never hit drought level 3, we were dangling right there for multiple times. And so that, of course, and we went through with lower usage of things, and so we got into trouble. What I want to make sure at the end of the day is, while we're looking at all this as where we are with our current usage, I would also like to see how this applies to a drought contingency plan that we have in place. And maybe I would like to see that as part of a recommendation that we would put forward, meaning that, we turn into a drought level 2, usage goes down even another level, correct? And so what would that do? And again, we know our fixed cost hasn't changed, so then we've got our little bump ups that we have for drought level 2 and drought level 1 and drought level 3. I mean, I'm saying that maybe an opportunity for us to also take a look at it and make some adjustments there at the entire program.
To strengthen the program.
To strengthen the programs, because
Yeah, I agree with
it needs to be across the board, not just on, conservation level that we're at right now, but needs to be, okay, at drought level 1, when we hit that, well, then it will go up. Here's a more proportional, again, to get us maybe back to that cost of service, knowing that, again, that denominator is going to change. And then we get to drought level 3, it's going to change again.
So, in line with what Mr. Hirschfield is saying, is there such a thing as a economic stabilization factor to help us in those severe drought contingency?
There is, and there are any number of utilities that have created and funded a rate stabilization fund, where in instances, whatever reason, drought or whatever it might be, revenues don't come in as planned, unusually wet, or we are in a drought stage where we've got to force consumption down. And it may not entirely mitigate the resulting rate increase, but it can be used at least in part to replace those revenues that we otherwise would have generated. And of course, though, when you think about any fund, to create a fund, you've got to fund it. And so where do the revenues come from to fund a rate stabilization fund? They come from the customers of the system. Mm-hmm. So all things being equal, we need to raise rates by some amount to create that fund, and then have specific guidelines for how it may or may not be used. And a couple years ago, we did something exactly like this for the city of Austin in terms of implementing, it wasn't called a surcharge, but for simplistic purposes, I'll call it a surcharge that would be dedicated to a rate stabilization fund, and it had specific guidelines for how those monies could be used. It had guidelines for when it would be sunsetted. When the fund gets to this predetermined level, then it goes away. If we then draw out of the fund and have to replace that, it kicks back into place. So there are things that can be done along those lines. It takes money to make money, the old saying. Yes.
I don't want
Again, I just want to go back that, what Mike had said was exactly right. We want to hit this one time, and we don't want to hit it, oh, by the way, now we've got to change our drought contingency plan after we've already hit you with 20% here and then 10% here. I think it needs to be a comprehensive plan too. So that's the part that I think I'd like to see what that should be, again, based upon looking at some of our historical data, that when we went from drought level, conservation to drought level 1, what was our drop in usage? 5%, 10%, 8%, I don't know, there's a number. And then when we went from drought level 1 to drought level 2, what was our percent decrease? And so again, you can again take those same numbers of those blocks that you've got and say, okay, based upon those blocks, we think drought level 1 should be these rates. Drought level 2 should be these rates. Drought level 3 should be these rates. That to me is what I'm asking for.
Okay.
So we can go through and say, all of this is one program. Am I asking too much, you think?
Well, I don't want to keep adding to that list, but I mean, where my mind has gone to is just even on, we have, as a community, have gotten better at using our water, and that's the trajectory we want to be on. I mean, you're talking about big, hard and fast steps that are taken. My mind's going to, what about sustained less use by residents? Now, we may have times of growth in the community that'll level that out and all, but if we continue to gain efficiencies through conservation in our system by residents participating, what impact does that have on all of these assumptions that have been made here as well? And that probably is a very nebulous gray area, but it's just something that I think we don't want to totally lose sight of if we can.
In part to
handle that.
address both of those points, in an indirect way, we've used demand data from a recent period that was when we were in this deep drought. And so in that sense, we feel like we've got a conservative plan. Now, that doesn't go to either of your 2 points in a specific way of how would this rate structure change if we had a severe drought that produced water sales less than, Rick, what you and Rocky have in the report. So we don't have that, or to your point of per capita use, and Rocky, you alluded to it, per capita use is at this level. Well, how much more can it go down? And what if, without a drought, just by heightened awareness and consciousness within the community, how much more savings could we get? So you've given us a little food for thought that really go to the conservative nature of our plan, and any rate structure we recommend, does it have the flexibility then to align with our drought plan and be adjusted in an efficient manner, as painless a manner to generate revenues that are needed? That's part of your point, Mr.
Yes.
Hirschfeld.
But the point is that today, we're in conservation mode. We haven't been in conservation mode in, with the exception of this period right now, what was it, 4 years, 5 years? I mean, there was a significant period of time where we were not where we are. And that's why I believe that that's what put us in today's bad financial situation. I mean, that helped drive down any kind of extra fund balance we used to have. We used to have a 75-day fund balance. I know we don't now, but we used to. And so we did all that. And so again, going to the well one time with a rate structure, that's my point on this, is that I think it needs to be comprehensive beyond just conservation level. It should include what we want to talk about with drought level 1, drought level 2, and then drought level 3. Just my opinion.
I've got one other question in terms of that inverted scale on water use. And if that, the way I get the consolidation, that makes sense. The assumption is that y'all felt like that, the way that, what does it go to 4 categories now?
It's 4 blocks and then everything above 39.
Right. And if that's adequately priced, I guess you would say, based on usage and how that goes, or if there should be some tweaking to that?
Rocky, talk a little bit about, I believe what we did is maintain the same relative relationships that had existed before between the unit prices. Block 2 was X% of Block 1, and we maintained that. Speak a little bit to that, Rocky. I think that's the
it's just
question.
higher level that really made a difference. From when I looked at the numbers, it looked like 0 to 2, you know, that those lower levels didn't really change.
No, I agree there. But is that where we should, I mean, is that where we should be, or should we incent, let higher usage payers pay even that much more, or not? I mean.
And Rocky, before you respond, let me give sort of a general overview on that. The greater reliance that we place by incentivizing high-volume water users creates even more revenue stability. We dramatically increase the price under this new structure where we have 5 tiers. If we dramatically increase the price of tiers 4 and 5, then in theory, our customers are going to react and use even less water. And we're going to get less revenue, which, I mean, that's the whole purpose of conservation, right? Well, unless we have that contingency plan that if they use less water, we're still okay, because we have a rate stabilization fund, or we have a 5-year plan that's going to keep our cash balance at 100 days, not 75, those kinds of things. So that's one observation when we have this discussion about incentivizing water conservation or disincentivizing wasteful use. The other has to do with what I would call equity. That cost of service between residential and non-residential, that deals with inter-class equity. But within the residential class, we have what we refer to as intra-class equity. That if I'm charging, as it's shown on this slide, then the 2016 rate, $9.98 for use between over 39,000 gallons. Is that a cost of service based number? Can I point to the cost, the incremental cost our system incurs when the usage goes that high? And it's a little bit of a gray area. And here in Texas, we don't have definitive legislation, legal precedent that really deals with intra-class equity. It certainly, we've got precedent on equity between classes. In California, there's been recent litigation over this very issue. What's your justification for charging $9.98 versus $2.99? And there's been litigation that says, you better have a cost basis for that. Go out and show me that the marginal cost of the long-term supply project is $9.98 per thousand. And if you can do that, then that rate's okay. And I only give you this background that we can't just arbitrarily say, well, let's take the $9.98 up to $15. That'll incentivize people. I want to try to keep it to some reasonable basis and also recognize the instability that might create if we're counting on that revenue to cover our cost.
In that light, we do have to be very careful, because we have to be, for the high volume users, our biggest competition, there is a competition out there, and that's these guys driving around with 1,000, 2,000 gallon tanks sitting on the back of their trucks, and they drive around and have their wells or go out to Brown's Pool or whatever, and they buy the water from that. We have to know that we are at least somewhat not highly out of that market. Correct statement? Because then I know that what happened on this last drought, when we started talking about drought level 3, going back in, I think it was about 2012, we were literally days from hitting that point. I know a lot of discussion was had with a lot of people, a lot of high volume users, of saying, okay, that's fine, I'm just going to go buy it outside. Well, guess what? That's horrible for the city as far as the water department. You now just lost some of your biggest users to your competition. So that's the other part. You've got to be careful that we don't price ourselves out of the market with what for that type stuff.
Did you asked a question earlier about residential versus business? I think lowering the residential rate and having the business pay for that at the higher end is a better way, in my opinion, to go. You asked for that.
And the only paraphrase I would have on that is moving to cost of service makes perfect sense.
Right.
If we're now not,
Exactly.
if we have classes now that aren't paying their fair share, let's move in that direction so we can stand up and say, we've got these big increases, but the first thing we did is we made sure that each class was paying their respective cost. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we've gotten a lot of great feedback today. So internally, some of the takeaways for us have to do with the financial plans. And Mr. Boyd, your comment about we have the highest, we have the mid. Where are we going to end up if you consider sales tax? So that's going to influence the financial plan. Rate design, rate structure, I've heard, yes, movement to cost of service makes perfect sense. I didn't hear any strong objections to that. And whether we do it right away in 2017 or phase it in over 3 years, I didn't hear any strong feelings one way or the other. Those are the two biggest takeaways for me. And so we'll internally review that and talk about next steps in the process.
Okay.
I think really we're at the end of the presentation.
Anybody else have any questions?
I just
Rick or
may
Rocky?
raise the point I visited with you about at the break, about at least some interest, this is from personal perspective, not representing the board, but in this statement, but the idea of how you build in mechanisms to support conservation, be it rebates or other types of incentives for, it could be manifest in any number of ways, but how that can be contemplated within the broader approach of what we're looking at here. I don't think that's necessarily big dollars and big impacts to the budget per se, but they can add up, and it'd be something I'd like to at least put on the table.
You bet. Rocky, you want to talk about our work there?
As part of our scope for this particular study, we have a piece that analyzes several different conservation measures and costs thereof, as well as cost-benefit analysis, and that is being completed as we speak. I've already seen a draft, so that looks good. We have a sub-consultant working for us on that particular piece, and that's probably weeks or maybe even days away from being put in the city's hand and allowing them to review that. Once again, you mentioned though the dollar amount's not typically exorbitant unless the city would like to move forward with some of the more extreme measures, and so. But at this time, we didn't bake any additional costs into our financial plan for those measures because the.
And in conclusion,
Yeah, I guess we're done.
but and on that point, the measures we're talking about are all non-price measures along the lines of what you talked about, rebates for toilets or zero escape, those kinds of things. What we're dealing with today on the rate structure, that's a price incentive. So these others would be non-price mechanisms that can be used to encourage efficient water use. Yep. Okay. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
Rick,
This has
Rocky,
been
we
very
appreciate
useful for us. Thank you.
Good presentation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Any announcements, Bill? Anything we need to talk about? We need to schedule the tour of the facility.
Next meeting?
You'll
Next
do-
meeting?
And then next meeting date, yeah.
Yeah.
Which may need to be two different things, I would think.
As far as how to proceed with this, you had mentioned having a workshop with just, I guess, the board.
What do y'all think?
To-
I mean, I
That's
know
a good
we're,
idea.
but I mean, can we take this back? We can read it, we can write down all of our questions. To me, we can put them on a board and figure out what's important to us. And I know that Roland can do some work. We can talk about the half cent, and be part of it, because I want to understand that and then figure out what reserve we need there. I just think there's a lot of things we could do over maybe it's going to take us 2 or 3 hour work study group.
And we can develop some additional scenarios with those, so we can actually look at what that, folding some of those things into the
Okay?
financial
Nick,
plan.
Boy, August gets crazy, doesn't it? The 7th, well, what do y'all think? For the next meeting date, let's talk about that first. What does people's calendars look like the week of the 17th? 17th, 18th, 19th? Y'all okay?
I'm fine.
I mean, I don't know if we want to, we'd be worn out probably, I don't know what'd be on the agenda next time, but do we want to do try and do it, twice in 1 week? I don't know what y'all's calendars are like and how you, from your business standpoint.
When you
Mr.
said the
Chair,
week of the 17th, on August?
Yes, sir?
City Council is on the
The 18th.
18th.
18th. But whether that's a work study group and then we have a meeting, I mean, I know we're trying to keep our dates.
A work study.
Huh?
We wouldn't have to be here for.
No, we can do it at the bank or wherever. I got that boardroom, we got board and all that.
Mike,
Yes,
as
sir.
you consider the calendar, one of the things to think about is the city's fiscal year ends September 30th. We're in the midst of the budget process now.
Okay.
If we were, let's say that we saw a proposal that we liked, recommended it to council, they liked it, and we wanted to implement on October 1st. We would, in the past, we've recommended a time frame of about 30 days for the billing folks to get things entered into the system. Bill, I don't have an idea how much time. I'm sure we could do it quicker than that, but we've tried to give them a full cycle to.
Basically, September 1 would be your.
It's your cutoff.
Well, I don't know. I know the direction I'm going. I don't know where I'm going to end up. I thought I'd start out there and try to back into some time frames for getting council to approve some things. So if we wanted to give them 30 days, we'd want to be done September 1 with that step, which means we would want council to approve on second reading an ordinance implementing these rates at the second meeting in August. Does that sound right, Bill? Which means we would introduce at the first meeting in August. So you can see we're not even backed into where we are. So, Bill, I don't want to step too much into your turf, but you can see where an implementation date of 10/1, we're going to need to squeeze that 30 days to get things in the system so we can adequately consider what appears to be significant changes.
Would it be, I mean, does it have to be done
October.
part of that budget, or can it be an amendment to the budget, or?
Well,
I know.
you know the answer
I
to
know.
that is we'll make whatever council passes, we'll implement the best we can, make the best of it, try to make it work. But I think that it does have an impact if we implement.
It's by far best if it is part of the fiscal budget.
Exactly. And actually, the key, whether or not we get it actually in the official budget, the key will be actually the authorization to levy the rates that council ultimately approves 10/1, if that's part of a financial plan which begins 10/1. We can, we don't, remember the budget is the tail. the dog is the rest of the organization. We'll
Of course, as soon as you start talking about it from a council perspective, then it's totally public. And, how are you going to develop some type of public, not campaign, but knowledge campaign, communication out there appropriate if we're in such a short time crunch?
Well, I don't know that we are, but if you're thinking about a 10/1 implementation date, I wanted you to be aware that
Sure.
there's some time
That's
that
tough.
it takes to get some of these things done.
Mm-hmm.
Michael?
Yes, sir.
Before you walk away, just a question. But we have an option of implementation date being January 1? Or, I mean, we could push that, I mean, if need be. I hear what we're all saying, and I think our main concern is the public education, keeping them informed, letting them know why and what, and allowing that additional time. And I think at least what I'm sensing is that the time constraint, there's not enough time to be able to do that, and I think that's a big concern for us.
I agree, and I before I would commit and say that, oh yes, that's much more important because we're talking about a 5 to 6 year time horizon. I think we want to hear from Bill that doesn't put a kink in implementation if it takes an extra quarter to get it implemented. But
Well, I mean, obviously, I think the better scenario would be October 1, but at the same time, I'm not sure, listening to this, that I know how to accommodate both of these, concerns. I mean, if we met, we would have, in order to do October 1, we'll need to meet next week or within a week or so and have your workshop, and so that we can have something prepared to take to council in first meeting in August.
And again, one of the things that I'm going to want to see is that drought level stuff. I truly believe that we got one chance to go to the well and get this get this thing right.
Okay. There's nothing magic about January 1 either. I mean, if we don't make October 1, it can be November 1. It can be. So why don't we try to schedule a meeting as quick as we can with y'all to keep things moving. We'll have that work session, and we'll if we miss October 1, we'll just have to deal with it.
I think
You
the
know,
optics become important here in the sense that the public doesn't feel like something's getting rammed down their throat.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily warranted that we have a 6-month lead and some long, drawn-out public discourse over this either. I think things like that can go too long. But if we got off on the wrong foot on that, and it's a short fuse, it could be a real. It could be a train wreck.
I want to build trust in city government, not take it down.
Yeah.
Seriously.
it sounds to me like in order to, that is the way we need to move. It sounds to me like we need to be thinking about not an October 1 implementation date.
Yeah.
And, council, when they see this, they're going to want time to digest it, get comfortable with what may be a difficult vote. So I think it's predictable that you're going to want to see some things a second time. I think they're going to want to see it more than once, probably also. And
Then I think it would make sense as far as a goal is no later than January 1, if we can back that up some, but that gives us
Okay, you want to talk about sales and marketing a little bit too, is that implementing something like that during the winter months is actually going to be a little easier on people to
it's the
to
best
swallow.
time.
Because it's volume driven.
Yeah,
Right.
don't do it in July or
That's right.
August.
the benefit of that is we do catch, if we can implement in time for when we set when the sewer bills are adjusted in the next cycle, that makes some sense.
Yeah.
So if we shoot for January 1,
I think January 1's a totally reasonable go. I mean, we'd want to get it done. You need to do it, have our meeting, go through it, get with the council, and get her done.
Thank you.
Is that okay, Mike? Thank you. So, that being said, y'all want to have a work group before the end of the month?
I say we keep the ball rolling, yes, if it fits everybody's schedule.
Well, let me.
One thing that, and I'll need to talk to, obviously, to Rick and Rocky on the timing of this, but the drought level issue might take a little bit more time than, right. So, and I don't, Rick, do you have a feel for?
Am I asking for too much, guys? I mean, am I?
No, but that could be an August item, agenda item too.
Yes.
To me,
Or something. I mean, it can-
all I'm saying is that in our package that we go sell to the council and the package that we sell to the public, I think it needs to be this entire package. Now, again, it's going to be a percentage, it's going to be some numbers, and there's going to be some backup based upon that develop those numbers. I don't know that it's pertinent that it's part of this next workshop, because I think that this next thing we're talking about is more conceptual of how does this program work? You know, is this kind of fit the methodology of how we want to be? And then the next part's simply going to be these numbers. And it's going to be either, you know, a 12% increase, a 8%, or 14%. I don't know, but that'll be just some numbers on what those are. Then we might argue about them, but it wouldn't be life or death. It's not going to change the program. I just want it part of the final package.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Hirschfeld, about the IT? And what you're looking for, is it really a illustration of here's what the rates would have to be as we enter drought stage 1. Here's what the rates would have to be if we go to a drought stage 2.
But yes, my purpose on this is that, again, when we got to, when we hit that 5 years of drought, when we were in drought level 1, 2, and almost hitting 3, I think we decimated and Mike, you tell me if I'm wrong in this, but I think we decimated the water utilities fund. I think we decimated they were on a positive track, they were on a good track of funding, and it fell through the floor, and we killed them. And so, I think we started drawing on, we pulled up many of the reserves. And so my point on that is that when we hit drought level at least 1 and level 2, I hope that we can at least sustain, that we're not digging ourselves deeper. We hit drought level 3, hey, all bets are off, bad things are happening, we're in trouble, okay? So I'm not looking to cover drought level 3, but drought level 1 and drought level 2, we at least need to be flat. We need to be revenue neutral.
And so whether
with lower usage.
Whether it's rates go up or we come forward with some plan, as I said earlier, perhaps calls for maintaining higher reserves to help mitigate the need for rate increases.
But the likelihood that we're going to be able to hit those reserves in a short period of time is not realistic. We all want to get there, and I'm happy to try to shoot for that. But let's try to look at realistic projections. We're hoping that El Nino is going to bring us lots of water, but what if it doesn't? We're going to be looking at some point in the not-so-distant future that we're going to be clicking up drought level 1. And then when drought level 1 hits, usage goes down. And that's all I'm telling you, is that I want to make sure that that revenue doesn't kill that department, that if you look at our drought contingency plans, I mean, there's rates based upon when you hit drought level 1, it goes up this percentage, and then it goes up that percentage for 2. That's all I'm talking about.
So just give us the options. That's what we're asking for.
Yeah. I
Just
just
give
wanna
us
know
some
what
options on
percentage
your
up.
recommendations. Here's what you can look at.
For those
And then
blocks that you're laying out.
We can say if we picked A and C, does that make sense? And you're going to say, no, you need to do D. And
Yeah, that's.
Does
That's
that
all.
make sense, what I'm asking for?
It does. Thank you for that clarification.
30,000
Yes.
foot level to start with.
Yeah.
Okay. July the 24th is a Friday. Does anybody have time that morning to do the workshop?
I do.
I do.
Stan? Can you do that?
We have something now.
Chuck?
You're unavailable?
What time you want to start?
You might just bring in.
0600?
Can we have additional information?
Fine with me.
By then?
I mean, hey,
Earlier the better.
I agree.
7.
You want to do 7 o'clock?
I don't care.
Y'all can drive in. No, just kidding. Is that too early? 7:30? Y'all tell me. Let's say be Friday the 24th is, you gonna do it at the bank? Is that okay? Got the boardroom and we need video.
Or
We
do
got
we,
video.
or do we,
I mean-
you want to
Well,
do
you
a
wanna
city
do it-
facility because of
That's right.
access and such?
Do we need to do it here?
Has to be an open meeting, right?
It has to
Yeah,
be,
it has to-
doesn't
we'll
it?
have a
That's
quorum.
right,
Then-
because it's all of us. Okay. Let's just do it here then.
I mean, whatever works, I think whatever works for staff, if we're gonna do it here. 8
Does that
o'clock?
work better for y'all?
I mean,
If y'all,
7.
had y'all rather have 8 o'clock?
That might be easier as far as this facility.
I understand.
The key for you to keep in mind is when we can do it here, it gets filmed and it'll be rebroadcast. And as you move toward that public campaign, keeping the public informed, that'll be more and more important.
Let's do it here.
Agreed.
Sure, we'll agree. Okay, 8 o'clock, July the 24th, here. Okay?
What should we, I know we don't know how long it's gonna take, but what do you, just as a.
Our goal's cut it off by 11. We got work to do.
So,
You know,
pretty much full one. That's what
but you, no more than 3 hours. Is that okay?
Sure.
And I think it would help, whatever questions we have from what we picked up today, for those of us that are not, this is not normal data, we need to send those to Bill. So we can at least get a core going, send that to Ricky, Rocky, give y'all some idea of, here's what we need to have clarified or what we're looking for. That would save us some time up front,
Absolutely. Just
okay?
forward those to me, and then we'll make sure they get them. We can incorporate that into any discussion on that morning.
You want to set the next board meeting also? Today's the 14th, let's see. The 11th of August is not a good day for me. Anybody got a preference? I'm gonna be out most of that week, but the second Tuesday's always a board meeting here at the bank for me, so. Do we want it on a Tuesday? Does it matter? Is one day better? 19th, a
Tuesday.
Wednesday?
Yeah, Wednesday would.
What does Wednesday the 19th look like? You okay? Can we set the next board meeting for Wednesday, August the 19th,
9 a.m.?
9 a.m.?
Actually, I'm gonna actually be in a drinking water conference on the 19th.
Uh-oh.
So, I mean, later in the week would be better, but,
Okay.
I can't make later in the week.
okay.
Moving a kid into college.
Well, it's fine, just keep it. It's fine.
But
Do you foresee a lot on the agenda in August? I guess we,
Not a lot. I mean, it depends on what's going to come out of the 24th
Yeah.
meeting
I
for sure.
guess-
But
I
I thought we'd probably try to do the tour on that day as well.
maybe what we're seeing is that we're going to we're going to get the consolidation of what we came up with at the workshop and maybe try to formulate the plan and say, this is our plan.
Right.
at least.
You need to be here, don't you?
Yeah, he does.
You need to be here.
When can you be here?
What does Monday the 17th look like?
Yeah, that's good.
Or the next
Yeah.
week?
Yeah, that's fine.
I know it's a Monday,
They're always fun.
but sometimes you'd rather be here than at work. Here, Stan, Monday,
Right now.
Roland?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Chuck?
17th.
Okay, let's
Good.
change it to the 17th, Monday the 17th at 9 a.m.
Mike, one of the advantages to that date is it's the day before council
Council
meeting.
meeting.
So if you get something you're
Yeah.
cranked up about, then that may be fortuitous timing.
Okay?
Michael, I have a question for you. I know we've been working on some of the boards and commissions meeting with the city council, conducting a joint meeting. what are your thoughts about the Water Advisory Board having a joint meeting with the council before the recommendation or the plan goes to council for their vote?
Well, I did just ask Ricky if we had scheduled this group to meet with council anytime soon. He said he didn't think so. Do you remember anything about that, Bill?
No, we actually talked about it, but there's two other, I guess this meeting, they've got Costa DC, and then there's somebody else scheduled for the next one, I know. So we were pushed out that far anyway.
It's a good thing for us to talk about. In case you're not aware, council has started having, when they break for executive session, they also eat lunch.
Right.
So they'll go upstairs and eat lunch, and rather than going straight into executive session, they've started trying to meet with some of these boards and commissions, which so that they
Right.
can work better together. This group, obviously, in this time when this kind of thing's going on, it would be good for y'all to be on the same page and have an understanding of one another so that you can work through these issues. So if that, first of all, need you to be aware that that kind of thing might happen, and for your knowledge sake, that would happen on one of the regular council days. If we think that's a strategy that would be beneficial to pursue, we could look into that.
It strikes me that maybe the good process would be to have this presentation to the council in some form, and then follow that with a joint meeting so that they've got this information, then we can jointly discuss where to go.
In those
Whether it's
meetings,
Costa DC or somebody, we can ask to move some of those joint meetings around. Because to me, it goes back, if we're looking at a January date, and we want to make a recommendation for implementation, then back into it, we might need to meet with them and, a September, August or September council meeting. But yeah, I think that'd be fine with us. I think we'd entertain the idea. Okay. Any other business? Appreciate everybody's time. Thank y'all very much.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second. I wouldn't.